All right, so let's jump into it. 18:1-2. We're going to not spend a lot of time on the scriptural passage. It's very short. We're looking at just 2 verses, and so we won't have much commentary on the scripture itself. But we'll get right to it. So Greek and then English. Metatafta idon allon angelon katavένοντα εκ του ουρανού έχοντα εξουσίαν μεγάλην και υγεία φωτίστη εκ της δόξης αυτού και έκραζεν εν ισχυρά φωνή λέγον έπεσε Βαβυλώνη μεγάλη και εγένετο κατοικητήριον δαιμονίων και φυλακή παντός πνεύματος ακαθάρτου και φυλακή παντός ορναίου ακαθάρτου και μεμισημένο. After these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So we are now, as it were, changing scenery. Chapter 18, we finished chapter 17. We were looking previously at the woman riding the beast. We'll talk a little bit about her tonight, but now we're looking at this fate of Babylon. And a new angel appears with this new scenery with great authority. And this authority, the mention of this authority drives home to us the power and the authority that of the proclamation. In other words, to support the proclamation and the weight of this proclamation that Babylon is fallen, and it's repeated, is fallen twice to drive home, that as if this angel was sent not just to proclaim, but oversee, the elder says, to oversee the destruction of Babylon or Rome, the perennial Babylon, the perennial Rome in every age. At the zenith of her power and glory, this was Rome at the first century when this was written and recorded, the vision, and given to the church. So Rome is at its zenith, right? It's more powerful than ever. And it is impossible for anyone at that time to imagine it would fall. It's just impossible. Not unlike other empires in the midst of their greatness. We'll talk a little about the Soviet Union, and there was a sense in the 60s and 70s that this was a growing and great menace for the so-called free world. Americans and the West were fighting with all their power, especially in the 60s and the 80s, to counter this communist menace upon the world, and yet it was toward its end. It was going to fall, but no one imagined it would fall in those days. This is even more drives home the prophetic voice of the church. St. Paisios will commemorate that tonight. Talked about it in the 70s that will fall. Father Seraphim Rose, as a layman, said it would fall in the 50s. So in spite of the worldly perception that this thing is going to be around for a long time, it would fall. And so the same with Rome in the first century. It's impossible to imagine that Rome would fall. And the elder says, during the zenith of her power and glory, an angel of God comes to announce the fall of Rome with words, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. This expression is a prophetic aorist. Now that's a kind of speech that shows something that's not assigned to a particular time, but it will absolutely come to pass. So it's in the present tense, but it shows there's no doubt whatsoever that Rome and empire will fall. In other words, it is a sure thing, even though the actual fall took place many centuries later. And we'll talk about the various falls as we go forward, because we know that Rome fell in the west, and it fell in the east much later. So we'll talk about that momentarily. This fall refers to historical Rome, but not only. It also includes and expands to the empire of the Antichrist at the end of time, which will also crumble, fall, and be utterly destroyed. In fact, all of these empires are eaten alive by the spirit of Antichrist, which is the worldliness, the passions. It's impossible for them to stand because they're not built on the rock. They're built on the sand of human ambitions, pride, arrogance, lust, and all the rest. So it will fall and be utterly destroyed as Rome was utterly destroyed eventually. The double fallen here not only prepares the reader something commonly used in Hebraic philology, but it points out that God's judgment in history is progressive. God's judgment in history is progressive. Very important principle. Step by step by step, there's many signs, many opportunities for repentance, and judgment comes over time. The fall is never sudden, the elder says, but progressive, right? So that's generally how it is on all levels, actually. Although the old Babylonian empire or city fell in one night, her fall was inevitable due to the widespread corruption that was specified and pre-announced by the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah long before her fall. So a fall happens maybe in a moment. We saw the Soviet Union, as it were, fall very quickly, and the destruction of the various walls that had been erected between East and West. But there's no doubt that we were leading up to that moment of the fall for many, many years. So this same phenomenon can be applied to Alexander the Great's empire, or to the Western Roman lands, the Rome itself, the old Rome that eventually fell to the barbarians and the various tribes in the West. The Roman Empire, when it did finally fall in 1453 in Constantinople to the Turks, and all empires, including, as we said, Soviet Union or the British Empire or Pax Americana, the American Empire, which we'll talk about tonight. So the fall is inevitable. It's prolonged. It's pronounced rather long in advance. It's pronounced long in advance before it actually happens. So with the fall of Constantinople during the 15th century, it did not take place overnight. The Christian Roman Empire, which is the proper term here and not the so-called Byzantine Empire. Any of you who have been brainwashed into believing that there was such a thing as a Byzantine Empire, and unfortunately, many of us still use the term and we go along with it, this kind of ruse, this charade, that there was such a thing called the Byzantine Empire. Nobody ever spoke of it throughout its whole history as the Byzantine Empire. There was a little town called Byzantium, and sometimes the people who inhabited the Constantinople, because it used to be called Byzantium, they were called Byzantines, but that's about it. The empire was never called the Byzantine Empire, and they never called themselves the Byzantine Empire. So the Roman Empire, the Christian Roman Empire, which, of course, Constantine took the empire, the seat of the empire, the head, that's what the capital means, the head of a city, and took it from old Rome and established new Rome in Constantinople. In fact, we just celebrated yesterday, or on the 11th, the anniversary of the founding, the consecration, and the ingenia, let's say the inauguration of Constantinople in 330. That was on May 11th. And so, what is it? 1,694 years ago, Constantinople was founded. So the Christian Roman Empire was undermined for decades, if not centuries. As you know, if you're a student of history, you know that one of the greatest factors in the eventual fall of the Roman Empire, the Christian Roman Empire, was the betrayal and undermining of the city by the Crusaders, who had gone astray and come to Constantinople and eventually overthrew Constantinople. It had access through a compromised emperor at the time who had used them to gain power, and he did not pay them back, and then took over the city, and they destroyed and pillaged and stole countless treasures, countless relics. Many of them were lost to history because of these particular crusaders and their Latin. Eventually, they had a Latin cardinal sent by the Pope. They had Latin rulers established, etc., etc. They did not have the proper piety and respect and all the rest. And so the great catastrophe really began in 1204, 250 years before the final fall of Constantinople. So for centuries, the foundation and the life of this empire was being undermined. It was not hard to foresee the fall of Constantinople because for centuries it was progressively losing its territories. And the once great empire was reduced to the perimeters of the city. The fall of the city or nation is nothing sudden. Similarly, the fall of the European Union has already been forecast a century ago. Spengler, for example, writes that Europe is in a state of decadence, soaked in alcohol and immorality. He pre-announces the fall of the European nations before there was a European Union. In our days, it is not difficult to see that Europe is facing great challenges. American writers and wise citizens are already foretelling the fall of the United States as it is full of corruption. Now, this is said in 1983. In 1983, the great elder said, America is going to fall, and not far. We can already see it coming. And 1983 was when Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States, supposedly greatest economy in decades, and they were largely outmaneuvering the Soviet Union. Eventually, the Soviet Union fell. Many people in the West think this is attributed to Reagan. Perhaps he had something to do with it, but certainly it was not nearly as simple as that. And so the idea that America and the American empire, I mean, there was so much pride and arrogance after the fall of the Soviet Union in America that it's hard to imagine America thinking, well, we're on the verge of falling. And yet today, everyone talks about the inevitable fall of America. It's coming. So he says in 1983, Elder Athanasios, in the middle of Greece there in the church there, talking to the faithful, American writers and wise citizens are already foretelling the fall of the United States, as it is full of corruption. We could easily say that today this corruption is threatening the fall of the entire world. East and West have adopted immorality and corruption. Humanity is beginning to rot to the core, preparing itself to be conquered by the Antichrist. Unbelievable words, really. 40 years ago. And very much one can see that that's happening. We have a one world, corrupted, westernized, secularized, consumer-driven culture / society that is being eaten away from the inside, rotten to the core, just like the Soviet Union was eaten away from the inside. And so the destruction of this facade that is the contemporary American empire is inevitable, according to the elder, and it's coming. Now let's hear Saint Paisios, the great ascetic and father from these recent days from Mount Athos. Let's hear what he has to say in his prophetic words from 1990. And about 1990, he said, with regard to the European Union, he said, it won't last for many years. It will be destroyed by the Brits and the Americans because they are one nation and work together. Now, elsewhere, I've seen him say, and I couldn't find it for tonight's lecture, but he says that the European Union, which I think at that time was not nearly as many countries as it is today, he said something to the effect of it will shrink to just a few nations, from 15 to 5 or something. And so there is a lot of instability right now with regard to Russia. And of course, all kinds of things we could talk about politically that are pointing to a lot of instability in Europe. But no one saw Brexit, which happened a few years ago. And it's interesting to hear he says it will be destroyed by the Brits, and the Brits are the first to go. The first to go were the Brits. So then he says about the Soviet Union in 1979, this is 13 years before its fall, he says communism will fall. Soviet Union will fall into many small states. Churches will be open in Albania. Of course, Albania was the most atheist country in the world. It was absolutely militant atheism, more than even the Soviet Union. Churches will be open in Albania, and orthodoxy will flourish. This is said in 1979. I don't think anybody was talking like that in 79. And then he says in 1988 about the Soviet Union. This is really interesting. Things are, of course, beginning to fall apart in 88, but not really that, you have to be a pretty knowledgeable observer at that point to know what's going on, it seems to me. And they were celebrating a number of, millennia of Christianity in 1988 and other things. The Old Testament says that for the sake of the people's sins, God allowed 3 generations to be in Babylonian slavery and then arranged so that they were freed. Each generation is 25 years. 25 times 3 equals how much? 75. The Russian Revolution took place in 1917. So 17 plus 75, that's 92. And there you go. Saying in 92. And that's exactly what happened. 92 is really the end of it all. 92, they were opening everything up. So St. Paisios, among others, seeing clearly what's coming and how things work, and confirming the scriptures as well that we're talking about here tonight. The nature of empires is that they rot, they fall, and they fall apart. And so what is the cause? There are many causes, but what are the root causes is right here in front of us. We're going to look at 18.3 just for a moment for one word, and we'll come back to 18.3 next week. But let's read the scriptural passage there. For all nations have drunk. This is what we'll look at next, right? We didn't look at it tonight, but just for this slide here, we're going to look at the word used here, strinos in Greek. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. That's Babylon's fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And so here we have this term strinos that the elder wants to analyze. The abundance is translated in English. So the obvious criteria that specify the fall of old nations or empires, such as Babylon and Rome, are atheism and immorality. Atheism, whether it be atheism, meaning in practice we have no God, we have no relation to God. We might have God on our lips, but we have no communion with God. Or modern atheism, which actually denies the very existence of a God, which is, of course, absurd for anybody before the 20th century, really, or the 19th, 20th centuries. They talked about, even the deists talked about something up there, right? Creating something. So in any case, whatever the kind of atheism it is, it doesn't matter. That and immorality, which follows from atheism. If there is no God, right, then everything is permissible. So what's the problem? Let's fornicate and be adulterers and have many wives and children and wives and all the rest. What's the problem? The loss of the meaning of ethos or ethics caused by the abundance of luxury. So the term here, abundance, strinos aftis epulutisen, to stri. So abundance of luxury is the criteria of decadence. What is decadence? How does it come about? There's an abundance of luxury. When the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of the luxury of Babylon, the great harlot. The words abundant, luxury, used to translate the word strinos a very rare and difficult word in New Testament Greek. The word most accurately expresses the state of today's humanity. Abundant luxury, today's humanity. It refers to the luxurious, arrogant lifestyle, the abundance of material goods, and the wasting of God's resources. All these things are connected. And that's why this whole movement for a political or economic solution for the so-called, global warming or the destruction of nature, all of that is delusional because it's all connected to this abundance of luxury. And so this is why constantly people are saying online, look at these politicians, they're telling us we need to cut back and be taxed on carbon emissions. And here they are in these massive planes flying around and throwing into the atmosphere zillions of tons of pounds of carbon dioxide. I mean, it's all right there in front of us, the absolute hypocrisy. Well, of course, because there's a love of luxurious lifestyle. This is what people lust after. This is the greed that runs the economic systems and all the rest. So that is at the core of the decadence, which brings about eventually the fall of these empires. The second meaning to the word strinos refers to drunkenness from sexual immorality, the lust of the flesh, hedonism, and a burning desire to gratify the lower instincts of the flesh, to gratify the lower instincts of the flesh. When we have that burning desire to gratify the lower instincts of the flesh, what should kick in is shame and a sense of impoverishment and a sense of departure from the higher things that man is made for, right? And so we feel like, oh my goodness, I'm like the animals, but no, that's not checked in this society, in these empires and places that fall into and are destroyed because there's a drunkenness from sexual immorality. There's a blindness that comes about. And so we see in our days clerics, unbelievably, even some in the Orthodox Church, claiming that one's sexual urge, sexual promiscuity, sexual lifestyle, whatever that might be, and the implication is clearly homosexuality, has nothing to do with whether has no bearing on whether you are a member of the body of Christ, a member of the church. This is irrelevant. I mean, why are we even talking about this? Well, because this is right here. It's right in front of us here. In the scripture, it screams that this is one of the results of apostasy. It goes along with atheism. It is part and parcel and a cornerstone of the immoral, drunken sexual immorality, the moral lifestyle, the lust of the flesh, the base instincts of the flesh. This is like, not even Orthodoxy 101. It's like grade school level knowledge of what it means to be a Christian. But here we are, signs of the times, many, many signs of the times today. St. Paul uses the same word, strinos, or abundance of luxury, of our delicacies. It's in King James. The same word when he writes to the Corinthians about the young widows who need to remarry because when they fall captive to the lower instincts, it is better for them to marry than to be alone and be unable to control themselves, letting sinful desires take over. Of course, these widows would have been in their 30s. People didn't live much longer than their 40s or 50s. In much of the world due to sickness and hard work, but also, but by the 40s, it's understood in the ancient church anyway that we're hanging up much of our days of sexual activity, and we're looking toward eternity. But that's certainly not the case today. But that would have been the case in St. Paul's and in the early church. People were cognizant much more of the vanity and the approaching end of our life. So this is at the base, at the core of the fall of these empires. Why does Babylon fall? Well, here's a big part of it. What is the lot of every Babylon? Right here we see New York Times opinion pieces and headlines about America over the last 3 years, 4 years. Our nation is falling apart. America is falling apart at the seams. America is an empire in decline. That does not mean it has to fall, etc., etc., etc. So this will be the lot of every Babylon, every Rome in history who takes a stand against God and his kingdom. The fall of Babylon or Rome does not eliminate its once brisk activities, but it makes it a dwelling place of demons. So it won't just cease to exist entirely. It won't just, poof of smoke, and we no longer have America. We no longer have the Soviet Union. We no longer have Rome. These things take time, but also are transformed. And the question is, what is the nature of this fall? It makes the place, the dwellings, a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, a cage for every foul and hateful bird, as it says in Revelation 2. This is the lot of every Babylon in Rome. Okay, do not think that it's not the lot of the American Empire, just as it was the Soviet Empire and all the other empires. It's the nature of the beast. It's a perennial reality for all the empires. Ancient Babylon serves as a type, a model of every city that imitates her misconduct. And of course, we're doing that and much more. I don't think in ancient Babylon they had trans, did they? Were they allowing the pedos to walk free, and possibly be legalized? Well, what do you think? I think we're probably worse than ancient Babylon, much worse. Ancient Babylon became the dwelling place of every unclean spirit. Of course, ancient Babylon and Sodom and Gomorrah, they had all the base instincts, but just how does that manifest itself, and to what form is it given institutional blessing and support by so-called, not only atheists, but Christians, so-called Christians, saying that the unclean spirits have nothing to do here with this particular sin. It's actually given by God. God has created man to lust after man and woman to lust after woman. This is the insanity. Truly, it's just insanity and nothing less of contemporary so-called Christians who probably don't pay much attention to the scriptures and the fathers to come to that conclusion. There were many ancient cities and sites that are deserted and covered over by different landscapes and civilizations. Are these places necessarily the dwelling place of demons? Are these the dwelling place of demons? Many Christian ascetics and hermits found legions of demons nestled in deserted castles or underground where there were temples of idolatry. So temples of idolatry in the ancient world, the Christian ascetics were going out there and living in them. And there they found indeed them to be dwelling places of demons. We have many stories from the lives of the saints and the ascetics and desert fathers, and that they would do war against them to drive them out of these places. But it's very interesting that we have in scripture and in church history a confession that indeed these places become favored dwelling places of the demons. So there were legions of demons nestled in these places or in locations that were formerly used for orgiastic rituals of idolatry. These places of excessive orgiastic idolatrous activity had bequeathed certain rights of possession to the demonic spirits. So the demons get rights, as it were, from the human beings who engage in all of this activity, which is contrary to their very nature. They're made in the image of God. It's contrary to God's law. It's contrary to their very being. They essentially release the demons to give them power and to do and to lead people into even more enslavement. So this is not something in the Orthodox Christian tradition that is a doubt. This is witnessed to in many lives and many writings of our saints. The Desert Fathers would often venture into the abandoned castle or walls of an abandoned city, or if an ancient temple were nearby, they would be confronted by a plethora of demons. It is also possible for demons to dwell in a man and in his bones even after he departs this life, which is a terrible thing. So while one's alive, demons can dwell in human beings. We know that. We have people who are possessed, right? And demons are driven out of them. And of course, we have prayers for the demon possessed to drive the demons out. Of course, we have many examples from saints like Elder Frem here. People would come and the demons would be driven out by his prayers. And then many saints throughout church history. Saint Paisios, famously, if you've ever read the book, The Guru, the Elder, and the Young Man, I think it's called. It was written by a man in Thessaloniki who actually is well known to me. And so these are real human beings that lived right now. His son-in-law was just ordained a priest and it's well known. So anyway, these demonically possessed people, he was one of them. St. Paisios cast out the demon that he had gotten. Why? Why did he get a demon, the young man in that book? Because he went to the Hindus. He went to the Hindus and he tried to see what that's all about. And he became possessed because he opened himself up to the demons. He gave rights. So they can dwell in a man, and they can dwell in a man even after his death, in his bones. They can use that as a dwelling place. As terrifying as this may be, and perhaps unacceptable to the minds of many today, of course, the rationalists and the atheists think this is a joke or something. This is well documented in the lives of the ascetics. For example, one ascetic lay down in the desert to rest. It was dark, and he saw a brown object on the ground, which he thought was as a pillow. A brown object on the ground is dark, obviously, no light. He soon realized that his pillow was a human skull, and his host did not let him get much rest. In other words, the demons that dwelt in the skull. He was informed by the skull dwellers that the skull belonged to a priest of the idols. Wow, that's pretty. The priest of the idols had many demons dwelling in him. The demons had jurisdiction over the relics of the deceased, and they nestled inside his skull. They revealed this information to the ascetic, being forced by the grace of God, just like we see in the scriptures. They talk to the Lord and they obey him, right? The demons tremble and believe, it says, much more than contemporary atheists, which is frightening to think about. So there you go. From the ascetic tradition, just a little smattering of reality check about the dwelling place of demons, which is mentioned here in the scriptures. Now, we can get a better sense of what St. John says about Babylon being a dwelling place of demons and every unclean bird. All right, we have that in the background. We understand the nature of these things. Now, what does he mean by a dwelling place of demons? In reality, there are no unclean birds, of course. Cows, or crows rather, and vultures are not unclean, as they are creatures of God, right? God does not make anything unclean. So what does the unclean mean? What is the unclean all about? This pertains to the law of the Old Testament. According to the law, they're unclean, not according to their nature. They're unclean according to the law. It's a category in the law. It's a question of ritual uncleanliness. This pertains to the law of the Old Testament. According to the law of Moses, these animals were considered unclean because their menu mainly consists of dead flesh and decomposed matter. They are not ontologically unclean. They are canonically, as it were, unclean, according to the law of Moses. Thus, we could say that a place can become desolate after excessive activity of idolatry and licentiousness. This desolation can also be understood metaphorically. And a place can become desolate from the grace of God because of apostasy. For example, the Temple of Solomon became desolate after the crucifixion, when the curtain of the temple was rent in two from top to bottom. The temple became desolate. This was a clear indication that the grace of God was departing from the unbelieving Jews. So this is also a way to understand desolation. And the loss of the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. So let's talk now about former glory and the worldly spirit in 3 examples. And we've talked about this before, but he gives it again. He likes to double down on this. It's very important for us today to be cured from a insipid secularization that comes, as it were, from the right. We want to be attached to former glories to an excessive degree without realizing that these things only are of this world and they're not eternal. Although the church worked in and through these places to the glory of God and the salvation of many. So let's start with the Church of Rome. The Church of Rome was glorious. She produced many saints and illumined the celestial mansions with millions of martyrs. The epistle of St. Paul to the Romans, called by many the gospel, according to St. Paul, is his best epistle. Unfortunately, and most tragically ever, Rome betrayed her great past. She betrayed her mission. She forgot the apostolic constitutions. And she once again began to follow in the footsteps of the ancient Rome of idolatry. Her downfall progressed after her possession by the Franks and Charlemagne's successors. And today she portrays a typical secularized church, a church following the whims of the world. The purpose of the church is to sanctify the world, to have the world enter the life of the church, not to have the church espouse the life of the world. This reminds me of something I saw recently, a interview with a new convert to Orthodoxy in the UK. I want to say Martin, I can't remember his last name. He's a very well-known speaker, writer, mythologist. Anyway, what's interesting, he says in this interview that I just saw, he says, he grew up a Protestant. He says, the Protestants are nice. The Church of England is nice. The Roman Catholic parishes I went to, they're nice. They're fine. I like them. He says, but I don't need nice. I don't need nice. I need, and I forget exactly how he said it, but it was basically something like, I need to be transformed. I need, I'm putting in my own words, but essentially saying, I need the other world. And this really is the nature of the so-called secularized church. It identifies with the world. It does not have anything from the other world. It's not leading people to the other world. It's living for this world. And therefore it's, as we'll see shortly, to be thrown out and trodden underfoot. And so what the elder is saying here, and what the saints of the church have said for 1,000 years with regard to the secularization of Rome, in other words, the falling into this worldly way, which is loss of asceticism, loss of the narrow path, the identification with the power and the glory of this world and all the rest, which has taken over. The Orthodox have been saying this for 1,000 years. Well, many people now are realizing it, and many people are waking up, and many people are saying there's something very wrong. Of course, Vatican II drove it home for many people. It's one more massive step away from ascetic, patristic, hesychastic Christian life. And so that's the first former glory, but it's not the last. Elder talks about the new Rome. Constantinople chose the same path many times throughout history. Many times she partnered with worldly authorities, and she managed to betray her mission as well. The new Rome did not hesitate to exile and persecute great and saintly patriarchs, to maintain good terms with the various demands of the palace. St. John Chrysostom, St. Gregory the Theologian, and countless other hierarchs, countless other saints who resisted the false unions with the old corrupt Rome in the latter parts of the history of the empire, or the iconoclasts, or the many Arian leaders of the Roman Empire, emperors, and many other times of perversity and immorality in the palace and all the rest. As this is, unfortunately, we have to walk this narrow path, this tightrope, to see both, on the one hand, how glorious and helpful in many times throughout church history the emperor and the empire was when it was holy, when it was obedient, when it was struggling, when you had emperors who were ascetics, who were lovers of truth, all the rest. Of course, the gospel was greatly aided. And then there were many times when the opposite was true. And this is the nature of the worldly and secularized nature of authority and power in this world. It's not possible for it not to have this temptation continually come again and again. Saint Erethrus did not hesitate. This is the interpreter of the book of Revelation in the 9th century, did not hesitate to write that the conduct of the New Rome, he had lived through iconoclasm and many other things, including scandals of promiscuous emperors and all the rest. This conduct of the New Rome is very comparable to the ancient Rome of idols. Accordingly, and due to her conduct, Constantinople, the New Rome, was made desolate over the centuries. She progressively lost her flock and all of her territories. And this is amazing coming from Elder Athanasius. I know people who have not lived in Greece. I was blessed to live in Greece almost 20 years. If you've not lived in Greece, you've not understood how important for most of the ecclesiastically oriented Greeks, contemporary Orthodox Christians in Greece, how important Constantinople is to them and to the hope that is within them, and that includes all Orthodox Christians, really, in many ways. I mean, we just talked about this at an event last night, celebrating, as I said earlier, the anniversary of the founding of Constantinople. So, I'm not here to just trash or to simply and blindly praise the great city of Constantine, New Rome. We need to have a sober-minded assessment, the good and the bad, and that which is for and of the church, and that which is of the world. But it is stunning for me as an grew up in America, went and lived 20 years in Greece, and to hear Elder Athanasius say this, it's really to his great credit and his great objectivity, because there are many who will not want to talk about this, will not admit this, that we saw in the 20th century the desolation of the Constantinople, Patriarchate of Constantinople. Of course, in the 15th century, we saw the desolation of the empire. But he's very honest to say, look what has happened. We've lost all of the flock, all of the territories that was once in Asia Minor. Why is this? Well, because it's the subjugation and the loss of the strictness of the gospel, secularization of the people in leadership and elsewhere. So this is startling for me, and it's beautiful. But he doesn't stop there. Let's continue, because it's not just old Rome and new Rome, it's also third Rome. But before we get there, he says one more about today's new Rome. Today's new Rome, he says, tries to hold on to her leadership status through ecumenism, this tragic pan-heresy, while dragging the rest of the Orthodox churches behind her. This is so true. Has become more true than ever in the last 40 years since Elder Athanasius said this. That this is clear to everyone who has spent any time analyzing what's going on in the new Rome today, that they are putting all of their eggs in that basket called ecumenism, but even more so in the powers behind ecumenism, the Western powers, the American government, and all the rest. It's very clear with the events in Ukraine. And so this pan-heresy, this tragic reality that is overcoming many in the leadership of the church today, it is unfolding before us. And the elder was observing it early on in the 80s, of course. And I think there were many people in the church in Greece back in those days who were observing it and calling it out. So that is New Rome today. But also the same thing, he says, happened with the third Rome, Moscow. While she accepted Christianity as late as the 10th century, she attempted to supersede the second Rome after its fall in 1453, and succeeded in surpassing even the first Rome in terms of persecutions against the Christian church during communism. Somebody say, well, that's the church getting persecuted. Well, he's not making a sharp distinction here, because the power centers of power is what he's talking about. He's talking mainly about the empire, but also all those who get sucked into that mentality in the church, and that identify with that and make the church of the world. I mean, so it's both and, I think, is the way I'm reading his analysis of this. And so when the persecutions came in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and hundreds of thousands and millions of people were slaughtered, hundreds of thousands for their faith, thousands of clergy, there were also those who compromised, as we went through in our 10-week course on the new martyrs. They compromised gravely in the so-called living church, which we'll talk about tonight in a bit, and the successor to the living church, which is the Sergionist approach and understanding of our church and relation to the world. So that is a segment of the church which became the living church, or became the Sergionist mindset, the ones who are dominated by that worldly approach, that think that the bishop has to be a diplomat. What does diplomat mean in Greek? Anybody know that? Diplomatis, two-eyed, like one eye over here, one eye over there. That's what a diplomat is, right? In other words, he's a double-minded, two-faced man. And there are people today in the church who say, no, we need to have diplomats as bishops. No, we don't. There's nowhere in the scriptures or in the church fathers that anyone has ever praised a bishop for his diplomacy. On the contrary, his role is to speak the truth like all the prophets of all the ages. So there is a lot of distortion among the highest clergy, not just in one particular church. There's a trend today among certain people to pick sides and say, well, I'm with Russia and I'm not with the Greeks, or I'm with the Greeks and with Russia. That misses the mark. They don't understand what's going on. It's all throughout the local churches. It is a temptation all throughout the world. This ecumenism, this secularism, this whatever form of secularism you want to talk about. You want to talk about ethnophilatism, you want to talk about ecumenism. They're both expressions of the world. Secularism, which is, as the elder has said many times, the spirit of Antichrist. Whatever makes the church into the world is the spirit of Antichrist. And it will prepare those people who are partaking of that, because it's not everyone, obviously. And the faithful remnant are there, and the faithful monastics are there, and the faithful bishops are there. But we're talking about those who are following the world and refuse to, as it were, relinquish their claim on orthodoxy, even as they adopt and succumb to the mentality of the world, which is the spirit of Antichrist. So this is the great danger. We're going to talk about that going forward. So let me stop, and let's go on to this very interesting analysis now. The elder turns and he says, I want to share with you an analysis of the events of the communist revolution and how they were correlated in the mind of Bishop Innocent of Novgorod. Now, I don't know if this image is the Bishop Innocent he has in mind. I found this online of a certain Bishop Innocent who was in Novgorod, but he actually wasn't the bishop of Novgorod, from what I can tell. He actually ended up criticizing the living church, then succumbing to the living church, then repenting and rejecting the living church, and then was martyred. The one that is this image here is Bishop Innocent. Now, is he the one that the elder's talking about in this document? I could not verify that, but it could be. I don't know. I didn't see any other Bishop Innocent that came up online. So he doesn't tell us exactly who it is, doesn't give us a last name. It just says Bishop Innocent of Novgorod. But Bishop, this text that we're gonna share with you, it correlates the events of the communist revolution with the prophecies of Revelation. It's an interpretation of the special relationship of the great prostitute who rides the beast, which we just talked about in the last section. And this bishop says, what is the significance of the beautifully clothed woman? She is not a serpent. She is not a beast having nothing in common with the people. She is not an unintelligent person who has nothing to do with Christianity. She is a human being indeed, a woman of luxury, adorned with purple, scarlet, and precious gems. This woman refers to a Christian organization, but not to a naked and deformed institution, not to a heretical or Protestant sect. On the contrary, this woman clothing luxury has special laws, great worship, and formality. Indeed, this is the living official church, the prostitute. Such an organization manifested itself in Russia during the rule of the Red Beast. All right, so this is the are you familiar with the church? If you're not familiar with the so-called Zosa Ecclesia in Greek, the living church that came about in the 1920s, or just about 1920, and flourished until the 30s, or early, maybe even into the 40s, and then it basically just fell apart. But it was supported by the communists as a way to subjugate and subvert the church. And there were worldly secularized clerics who took the opportunity to basically put the ascetic Orthodox Hesychastic tradition aside. They wanted married bishops. They wanted priests that married twice. They wanted many innovations in the church. And so they thought, well, this is an opportunity for us to grab power and put our innovations in, which they had been harboring for decades. And they went together with the Red Beast, the atheist, the communist, to gain this power and supposedly, play the role of church administration. And at the same time, the Soviet powers are putting the great saints in prison, like Saint Tikhon in house arrest. So these fake bishops, one of them was a married priest who they made into a bishop. So they ignored the tradition of the church for the last 1,300 years, 400 years. And we could go on, but I'm going to direct you to our 10-week course on our channel here, all about the Catacomb Church, about the new martyrs. And we have a whole section dedicated, a whole lecture dedicated to the living church. So I really highly suggest you go and watch that if you have not. So we're not talking about some obviously graceless Protestant sect. All right. This is not the woman riding the beast, right? For Bishop Innocent. So what is this living church, so-called living church? It is the union of Christianity, in this case, with red atheism. Now, we don't imagine that we don't have red atheism today. We have Marxism and all the contemporary ideologies that are just as bad or worse than that. They're much more subversive, and there's many more means for subversion today than ever was in the 20s. Unfortunately, those who consider themselves representatives of Christianity, servants of God, the clergy, become servants of Satan while pretending to be in the service of God. One can truly marvel, pondering the conception of this, quote, living church, when the atheist socialists declared war against God in Russia and proceeded to close monasteries, churches, to persecute, torture, and execute bishops, irrespective of dogma. Some Orthodox priests went to the Red Authority, the Bolsheviks, to object to the persecution of the clergy. The Communist Party responded as follows. The clergy are considered enemies of the Communist Party and socialism because they support the authority of the Tsar. The appellant priests answered that they had no problem serving and cooperating with the Soviet authorities as long as they were given all the rights they had under the Tsars. The Soviet Party agreed to give them whatever rights they wished for as long as they became agents of the Red Atheist Authority and agreed to work for the extinction of all the enemies of the atheist state, not excluding the Christian religion, of course. This group of abominable priests of the previous official church accepted this proposal and immediately succeeded from the church and Patriarch Tikhon of Moscow. So they split off from St. Tikhon and the other new martyrs and confessors and the faithful, St. Hilarion Trotsky and others, split off, and they become agents of the state. They immediately formed their own community with the name The Living Church. By treading on this path, this woman dressed in luxury proved to be a prostitute riding upon the red beast. The representatives, so they're seeing this, the beast, the red beast is communism. The representatives of the Church of Christ formed an alliance with the servants of the devil for the extinction of Christianity. The living church, quote unquote, the living church, formed a synod that was ratified by the atheist Soviet authority and established the General Civil Office, the GPU, a committee of 3 atheists to commence and see to it that the synod, the of bishops that they created, gladly fulfilled and performed all requests and desires of the red atheists of the Soviet state. Now, this, let me just say one word before we continue reading this text. Now, back in those days, that kind of external, official, institutional subjugation was essential. But today it's not nearly as essential, right? So what they want is essential subjugation, appearance of continuity if possible, appearance of no innovation, appearance of harmony. And anybody who protests today is seen as the one who is disrupting the continuity. So things are a little bit different in terms of methodology and just the refined nature of the beast today, but not the essentials are all there. After this, the agenda of the destruction of sacred Christian treasures and symbols was immediately implemented. Interesting, isn't it? Oh, we have this fake church, but nonetheless, we're going to destroy everything. So absolutely nothing was given to the Christians, no matter what compromises they made. This is extremely important. One of the great delusions of the living church and the surginess was, if we compromise, we'll have something to show for it. We'll actually have some breathing in space. We'll actually have what we seek. And indeed, all it did was bring more persecution upon those who were faithful. The triad of the atheists, the committee over the synod, for example, expressed the desire to close all the monasteries. The synod, like a puppet, officially requested the closing of all the monasteries in the Soviet state. The Soviet state immediately complied with the request of the synod. This closing of those monasteries began. The monks and nuns were dismissed. The churches were turned into hospitals, nightclubs, theaters. By the way, for all of you who say this only happened in 1920s Russia, you're wrong. The closing of the monasteries happened about 70 years earlier in Greece by the so-called king of Greece, who was imported from Europe at the time, and his European-minded reformers. They closed all the monasteries in that kingdom. It was southern Greece at the time. Monks and nuns were thrown out. They were wandering many times. And we have saints from that period that they were wandering preachers because they were thrown out of their monastery. So the demonic inspiration of closing monasteries down and throwing the monks and the nuns under the road, well, it's not just in red Soviet Russia. To the general outcry, burst of anger, cursing, and grumbling of the faithful, the red authority would commonly respond that this was not their idea. They were simply fulfilling the request of the quote-unquote Christian synod. Through this sinister methodology, they closed many churches and incarcerated and sent to concentration camps and executed myriad of bishops, priests, and simple faithful Christians. As expected, the quote living church introduced many innovations. Married priests were promoted to bishops, and widow priests were permitted to remarry while maintaining the office of the priesthood. Of course, that's forbidden. And yet, we have a living church desire among certain people today. I just read, but I can't believe it, that there's actually been a priest remarried in the Church of Alexandria just a couple of days ago or weeks ago. He was allowed, even though he has a wife, to marry another. That is totally and utterly strictly forbidden by the holy canons. I understand that this already happened. Somebody was remarried after the repose of the wife in the church in Crete. That was a year or two ago. These are forbidden by the holy canons and by the ecumenical councils and have been totally condemned for 2,000 years for the church. So this is the spirit of the living church. It's alive and well among the modernist / ecumenist / worldly minded. All right. Not something only in the 1920s. Each bishop and priest of the quote living church was also an agent and informant of the GPU, the Supreme Council of the Soviet Union. Now, at the time in the 20s, the rest, besides living church, everyone else that was in the Church of Russia, the Patriarchate of Moscow, to my knowledge, there was great resistance to the living church among them. They suffered for it. So what that changed with the rise of the Sergianist position, which basically was a kind of second living church. That's how it was seen by the new martyrs, as a continuation in the spirit of the living church. It's very important. What is the major error? And this is me talking, not Elder Athanasius. What is the major error of the Sergianists? Well, it's identifying the nature and the heart and the life of the church with externals, with this idea that we need to compromise the faith in order to keep the buildings, keep the public life of the church going, keep whatever that is. So the hierarchy was clearly lost. And the new martyrs are brilliant in their analysis of this. It's all in this 10-week series that I've told you about. I really highly recommend you guys watch it and listen to the new martyrs and their wisdom. There's so much to learn for our day. Not an accident. Elder Athanasius goes to it and says, here we got something that's really a gem for us to understand the last days. It is a type of the last days, what they lived in the 1920s. So let's continue on, and we're going to close out the section here from Bishop Innocent. They turned in and brought charges against anyone, relative or stranger, who would speak against the atheist communist Soviet state, ever so obedient to the desires of the authority, and against the ecclesiastical canons. They defrocked Patriarch Tikhon, denied him even the schema of a simple monk. It is impossible to enumerate all those who they surrendered to the cause of the Red Dragon through martyrdom and death. In short, the living church, so-called living church, applauded, endorsed, and blessed all the murderous activities of the Soviet state and cursed the enemies of the Red Serpent. So that is from Bishop Innocent. We must not think that the dissolute woman riding the red beast that resembles only the living church of Moscow or of Russia and her members. Its meaning is much broader. All right, so let's apply it now for further on into our day. The scope of the great prostitute encompasses all Christians who, irrespective of where they may be, while retaining the label of Christians, that's key. They retain they are so-called Christians, right? That's what I'm a Christian. You can't tell me I'm not a Christian, even though I'm totally denying the basic commandments and teachings with regard to the moral life. They retain the label of Christians, work for the destruction of Christianity and for the benefit of the red beast of atheism. Now, I want to remind you again, atheism is not just the idea that there is no God. In the patristic literature, atheism is atheos, the one who does not have God, the one who is without God. In other words, without communion and without faithfulness to God, has no faithful relationship with God. All right, so that's also the atheist. So atheism does not have to be an outright denial of the existence of God per se. He goes on, thus, throughout all the centuries, and even in our days, Christians of all ranks, all lay people, priests, bishops, metropolitans, patriarchs, popes, became subservient to the beast, personifying the prostitute. Everybody here who has a friend who is a disciple or a follower of the Pope, please go and inform him and all of the others who are in the delusion that there has never been a Pope, or those among the various patriarchates, there's never been a patriarch, if they've somehow fallen in that delusion, that did not at some time there were not examples of them become subservient to the beast, which is the prostitute, which is secularization, the spirit of Antichrist. Bishop Innocent of Novgorod is quite clear of these matters, and there's no need for us to further explain or comment. And so we're going to move on, and we're going to go to something that's very much helps us to understand even more the nature of this beast, of this apostasy, this secularization. And we're going to remind everyone, Elder's going to remind everyone of chapter 11 of Revelation, where we talked about the measurement of the temple and the altar. He comes back to this again and again many times, and he loves it. It's very important for us to understand. It's telling us what it will be like in the end times, and of course, at all types of the end times that the church lives through. So he wants us to remember Revelation 11, 1-2, and let's reread it. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. but do not measure the court outside the temple. For it is given over to the nations, and they will trample over the holy city 42 months. They'll trample over the holy city for 42 months. According to the interpretation of the Holy Fathers, Jerusalem, the holy city, stands for the church. So the whole of Jerusalem is the church, all right? Not just the temple, not just the altar, the whole of Jerusalem. And so why is he not measuring the court outside the temple? He's not to mention the rest of the city. This is the church. That is a symbol of the church. He's not measuring a big part of the church. A big part of the church is not being measured. And what measurement means is that protection and the favor of God. All right. So excludes the city from this measurement. St. John the Evangelist is mandated to exclude the city from the measurement. We previously stated that the measurement with the reed denotes God's holy protection that was limited to the temple, altar, and a number of the active worshipers or members of the church. The rest of the city, church, is excluded from God's protection, for it has been turned over to the nations. In other words, the nations here are the apostates, are the Gentiles, the unbelievers, those who are of this world and not of this world. All right. These are the ones baptized clergy and laity. They once baptized, right? The nations were baptized, right? The nations had become, but they fell away. These were the once baptized clergy and laity who loved and compromised with the spirit of the world and live as members of a secularized church. This is huge. This is extremely important. And God, give us to be a part of that remnant. Give us to be a part of that temple, that altar, that area where the faithful dwell. Give us to enlighten us to stay on the narrow path. Teach us, Lord, how to avoid the traps, not to fall away into the spirit of the world, not to succumb to the secularized church mentality. You can see it. Anybody paying attention? Are you paying attention? You can see it all around us. It's all around us. Whether it be heterodox or even some so-called orthodox. They're succumbing every day and identifying the passions with a life in Christ. All right. They're identifying the passions with the life in Christ, and therefore they are a part of that church that will not be measured. St. Eustace Popovich, who suffered greatly for the faith during the communist period in Serbia, he writes the following in his book, Man and God-Man, and gives us insight into the nature of the true and the false, the faithful and the secularized. Christianity can only be the salt of the earth with its God-human power, the salt which can preserve man from corruption and evil. A Christianity adulterated and mixed with various humanisms becomes worthless salt, flavorless and bereft of the saltiness. Such salt, according to the inherent words of the Savior, cannot be made useful again, but will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. Every attempt and every endeavor to equate the church with the spirit of this age, with the fleeting movements of some historical periods, with political parties and states, removes from the church, Christianity, its very special character, which renders it that unique God-human religion or way of life in the world. It turns it into saltless salt. All right. So and he'll go on, and there's plenty more analysis in the book. And of course, there's also other books in English that we highly recommend. Anything by St. Eustace Popovich, highly recommend. The book that I have in mind right now is the the name escaped, published by the Institute of Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies. And it has a collection of his essays, including this one, and many more. And so highly recommend anything by St. Eustace Popovich. But he'll go in and he'll explain the ascetic, hesychastic core of the church. This is the key. If this is not at the center of our life, if we don't understand it properly and understand the way of the cross, the ascetic life, the salt is lost, right? So when you see so many signs today of the secularized so-called Christianity, right? Mainly in one word, it's without asceticism, without repentance, right? Without the crucifixion of the flesh, the crucifixion of the mind, right? So enjoy and embrace the fleshly life. All right, that's at the heart of those who are losing the salt. So what about the secularized church? Thus, a church that serves the agenda of an atheist state is most certainly not the vine of God. As Christ himself says, every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted will be rooted up. This is the group of so-called, quote-unquote, faithful, and the type of church that will be trampled by the nations for 42 months or 3.5 years, as it's referenced in the book of Revelation. St. John is instructed to not measure or include this type of church because it's lost God's protection. All right. So the picture above here on the page is the first, I think, and main archbishop of the living church in Russia. And I forget his name right now, but he was Ukrainian. He was a married priest. He made him a bishop. You can see he's beardless and whatever. I mean, the signs of secularization, changing of the practices and traditions of the church, etc., are all present. Below is a Episcopal church in New York, which has the flag of the trans homosexual flag flying there. And in their delusion, they think that being more Christian by embracing people who are insisting that the passions need not be put aside, insisting that homosexuality is compatible with the gospel. And they think that in doing that, they're somehow helping people come close to Christ and being Christ-like. So it's the equivalent of someone saying, your way of life, your drug addiction, your alcoholism, your whatever it is, whatever the passion is, whatever the distortion is, whatever is fine. Don't fight it. Embrace it. Let's institutionalize it. Let's bless it. And all of that is not contrary to what Christ is calling for us. Of course, it's a loss, as we just said, of the crucifixion of the intellect, the crucifixion of the flesh, the way of the cross, the narrow path, the ascetic life. And so it's the same spirit of the living church today. It's the same mentality. Bishop Innocent unequivocally calls her a prostitute riding the red beast, this living church. The Lord prophesied, and because wickedness, iniquity, or lawlessness is multiplied, most men's love, the love of the many, in other words, will grow cold. The love of the many will grow cold because of lawlessness, because of iniquity, because of wickedness. So the love of the many certainly includes, unfortunately, clergy and bishops who are no longer inspired by the love of Christ. Their love is compromised due to financial gain. In other words, not just financial gain. I don't think he means just like they're going to get paid, $1,000. It's also in that is all of that which goes along with it. That luxurious life, that life which puts somebody in the spotlight, that life that makes somebody special and make in the eyes of the world, right? That whole package that goes with money and fame and fortune, all the rest. So that love is compromised. Whenever you say, I want that too, I want that mainly, maybe even, you cannot love. This is the great lie today, that the love is to embrace the other and not help him overcome his passions, not tell him he's in delusion, not tell him that this is incompatible with the gospel, not to actually help heal him, but as he is in his passions, embrace him with no further ado, right? And so, because they don't see that as incompatible with the gospel, which is highly delusional. So love of money does not hinder their descendants of these descendants of Cain and Judas who betray the faith in the church. They are worthy descendants of Cain and Judas the Iscariot. This is Elder Athanasius, of course, talking, not me. I'm relaying what the great elder says. He's telling us how to understand these unfortunate figures in the church who have lost their love of Christ, the gospel, the narrow path, the ascetic life. They've lost true love for their neighbor, desiring him to be truly healed. And now they're embracing self-interests of various natures. So let's hear what St. Cyril of Jerusalem has to say about the status of those last Christians and the temptations of the last time. He records in his 15th catechism when commenting on the days of the Antichrist, I'm mostly concerned about the hatred between Christian brothers. By brothers, he means laity, clergy, and even bishops. He was a victim of such persecution by the Bishop of Jerusalem who ordained him. Everybody who's got this idealistic idea of the church and how things work and how it should be, right? Because there's a lot of converts who come to Orthodoxy and they say, well, what I read in the lives of the saints, I want to see in the lives of everyone in the church. But they don't understand that the saints were persecuted by people, like in the church. So here we have Saint Cyril, who was persecuted by his own bishop, who ordained him. He ordained him and then he persecuted him. That's it's always been. So these are the kind of things that happen. His ordaining bishop became an Arian at some point and harshly persecuted St. Cyril of Jerusalem for maintaining his orthodoxy. Consequently, even among the low-ranking clergy, we will have traitors of the faith who will form and join the prostitute church that collaborates unethically with the red beast or red dragon. That does not mean only atheism, but any secular state. So you don't have to have an avowed atheist state like the Bolsheviks. Anything that is of this world, the secular state, the spirit of Antichrist, which is almost everywhere today. I mean, do we have anything that we can really call a Orthodox Christian state? No, I don't think so. I mean, there's things that are close to it, right? There's things that are closer, but let's be honest, it's all over the place. And so they will collaborate with the powers that be that will be in the hands of the Antichrist. They will be traitors on all levels in those days, and they will not have love for the brethren. That'll be one of the signs in the end times. St. Cosmas, the great prophet that we talked about in our recent appearances on InfoWars and other places, amazing saint. St. Cosmas the Aetolian, in his 56th prophecy, states the following: there will be a time where today's harmony between lay people and clergy will be absent. Indeed. In prophecy 57, he says, the clergy will exceed everyone in impiety. So hard to hear, isn't it? Of course, there are many great clergy today, no doubt, but there will be many clergy, and there are today, who exceed everyone in impiety. In prophecy 108, he says, there will be a time when Christians will rise up against each other. All these are all very consistent with the other fathers and the understanding of this book of Revelation, the time of the end. This animosity between Christians does not refer to political parties or oppositions. No, the strife will be between those who have denied Christ and the church and those who have remained faithful, like we saw in that analysis of Revelation. And we see such an example in our days. This is a picture of Father Dimitrios Gagastathis, a contemporary saint in Greece who lived in the 60s and 70s, up until the 60s and 70s. He lived through the, I think he died in the 60s, actually. And he lived through the Civil War after World War II, and that's where he was persecuted. Listen to what the elder says about Father Dimitrios, great saint. Finally, the early fathers, especially the ascetics, were repeatedly asked about the state of the clergy of the last days. Their answer was that the clerics would not differ much from the lay people. They will be more concerned about their own self-interest. That's what the reference to money, right? Cain, Judas, that's what it's all about. Broad, it's not just money. Self-interest. We see this in the saintly life of Father Dimitrios Gagastathis, who lived here in Trikala. That's not far from Larissa. It's near Meteora. If you've been to Greece, you know the great monasteries of Meteora. That's very close. His amazing life story has been published in a very large book. The Metropolitan of Kozani at the time, in the 1940s, who served the communist agenda. He served the communists, right? So in Greece, we had communists. We had communists that were fighting against the Greeks. They were trying to take over Greece in the 1940s. And we have bishops who served the communists just like they were serving the communists in the Soviet Union. And he persecuted this holy priest, trying to kill him. The bishop tried to kill the priest because he was not a communist. The bishop wanted to kill his own priest. All right, so that is an example, well known to people probably in Laris and Triccola, but unknown to us, of a great and holy saint. He was not killed, thank God, by his bishop. So to end this chapter today, talking about this secularized church, and there's so much that I feel like I've missed, which is unfortunate, but can't cover every last word in the chapter. But there's much more. The secularized church, based on the aforementioned, there is plenty of ground that portrays the secularized church as a worthy representative of the prostitute of the Revelation, along with Babylon and Rome. All right, so now let's bring this full circle. We're talking about Babylon and Rome. We're talking about the fall of Babylon and Rome. We're talking about the prostitute. And what is this? It is the secularized church, along with Babylon and Rome. And we talked about the various empires. We talked about the secularized church in those empires, right? We had the Rome, New Rome, and Third Rome as examples of historical examples of a disintegration in terms of first on the level of the state, and then the church also being secularized by the, being so surrounded by the center of power and all the rest that went along with it. And so he gives those examples. He gives examples of the empires that have come and gone, the American empire that will come and go. But also along with that, and part and parcel with that, will be a portion of the church that's not going to be measured, secularized portion, the portion of those who want to retain their Christian identity, so in name only, but will identify with the world. They will be, along with these, this Babylon, Rome, they will fall. They will fall spectacularly and be destroyed, identifying with the world. They will be destroyed. We did not come to this conclusion based on this very impressive booklet of Bishop Innocent alone, but because we are also eyewitnesses of the mystery of lawlessness, the mystery of iniquity in our day. So Elder Athanasius is saying, because I have an experience and I see with my own eyes in front of me in the society, in the church, and in the state, I can see that he's right. Bishop Innocent was right about the living church, and there's a living church today, and there's going to be a living church even more so in the days ahead. We have witnessed, he says, Orthodox bishops and priests totally agreeing and aligning themselves with the secular authorities and ideologies of all types and colors, left, right, green, red, green, white, black, and whatever party is on top. What would he say today when there's leading clergy? What would he say today when there's leading clergy saying that passing a law in Greece, he prophesied this would happen 30 years ago. So this is going to happen in Greece. They would say, that's none of our concern. Caesar to Caesar, the Lord, we don't have to deal with that. Who is this? Who are these fascists in the church? Who are these Western puritanical types who care whether the church, state of Greece and the people of Greece consider marriage something which is an abomination? What would he say about them? What would he say about them? Oh my goodness. We readily see these opportunistic clerics, we see them all around us today, flow along with these ideologies and betray the church. According to St. Cyril, this is a sign of the end times, and that the Antichrist is approaching, when it becomes so easy for clerics to betray the mother church. May God have mercy on us. Amen. Thank you, Elder Athanasios. Thank you, Elder Athanasios, for allowing us. Thank you for allowing us to have eyes, further eyes to see, to discern, and to pray and avoid the pitfalls that are all around us today. All right, let's open it up to questions. I've got 12 here. Let me just see what we got over in Crowdcast. 2 questions. We're going to start with Crowdcast tonight. This is a hard question to ask, clearly ask. This is from Sergius on Telegram. This is a hard question to ask. How much is marriage between two Orthodox Christians like that of the church, where the church prays for each other? Where one spouse prays for the other spouse when one is strong and the other spouse is overburdened by work and life and struggle with prayer. Does one save the other? Does the strongest pray in place of the other as they are one? Well, I'm not quite sure in the beginning what you mean. How much is marriage between the two Orthodox Christians like that of the church, where the church prays for each other? But yes, absolutely. There is, in every way, there should be a struggle and a striving for harmony, cooperation, and self-denial for the sake of the other. That's the nature of marriage. That's why it's working out salvation. You're working out to acquire the virtues in and through your spouse, and together with your spouse. If you're not in pain of heart in prayer for your spouse, who will you be? Like, who will you be praying for at the end of the day, right? Now, there are marriages which are very harmonious, and so that kind of struggle that you're talking about, where people maybe are not too unified, and there's a struggle for one to pray and support the other more than, it's not reciprocal, maybe, is that, it seems what you're implying, or could be implying, that's going to be a more intense and marked struggle for the one to bear the burden rather. And so whether it falls to you or not, whether you're the one struggling and the other one's praying to help you, it doesn't matter. That is essential in a marriage, absolutely. On a daily basis, in our private prayer, in the names we give during divine liturgy, first and foremost should be a spiritual father and our wife or husband and our children, and that should be a great concern to enable and to assist the spouse in the acquisition of the virtues, so that they can draw close to Christ, be communing with Christ, be united to Christ. The long suffering and the prayer is a big part of that. So yeah, I think it's kind of a no-brainer, right? I mean, absolutely. And that can be essential for the salvation of each one. Absolutely. Especially if they're struggling. First of all, let me just say thank you to Elias for becoming a member here, and Anna Christine also joining us here on YouTube. So let's go to the first question. Was it St. Paisios who said, who spoke about the golden age of Orthodoxy to come? Well, he was one of them. Elder Frem talks about it, and others talk about it. St. Porphyrios talks about it. He famously said, and I was told this recently on my trip to his monastery, when at the end of his life, they were building this massive monastery. If you've ever been to the monastery that he built toward the end of his life, it's very large, and it's only got a few sisters in it. And somebody asked him, what are we doing? Why are we building this massive monastery when we're just a handful of monastics here, and older monastics? And St. Porphyrios said to him, well, of course, this is going to be, in many years to come, this is going to be a center for the re-evangelization of Europe. There's going to be people from all over Europe coming here, and this is going to be a center for that to happen. So clearly, he saw a bright future, in spite of all of the clear signs of decay and all the rest. St. Paisios said there will be divine intervention in history. Elder Frem said there will be, after the war, there will be a Orthodox council that will put things right, and many other things. So I'm not going to get into all those, but yes, they did talk about that. Now, does that mean that we're not necessarily going to see more and more of the spirit of Antichrist? No, does not mean that. It's going to coexist with a portion as it were, cut out for the Orthodox for a time, for a short time, for the purpose of evangelization and repentance before the end. This is not a new 1,000-year reign of, Byzantium or whatever that people imagine. This is not, Constantinople is not going to become like it did in the 8th century. None of that's going to happen. So when people talk about the Golden Age or the Analambian Greek, I think they're misunderstanding the purpose and the nature of it. It's going to be far more limited than most people probably imagine, and it's going to be for a time, and it's going to be, again, for the evangelization, the teaching of many before the end. And that's how I understand it. That's how it should be. I think it's how it should be understood. And all that will be wonderful, glorious, but it should not be put in a worldly way. Like there's going to be political power and all the rest. Insofar as it's necessary, there will be a thing, but not for its own sake or for an extended time. Do you guys know if being a truck driver is a good job for an Orthodox Christian? It's a tough job, no matter what. Any job can be good if you're, most jobs can be good. Some jobs are not obviously good, but most jobs, and this job could possibly be good in the sense of if you can use your time to turn to God. So you have many, many hours alone on the road. You can listen to many lectures. You can pray the Jesus prayer. We actually have a lot of several truck drivers that stop at the monastery down the road here in Florence, and they make it a regular stop on their way, and they're doing this kind of thing. And now it's a difficult life, and it's demanding, but could possibly be made if you can stop for divine services on your way. You can always be on Sunday in church, and you can have a home parish. All that I think you can do. That it could work. Do you think it's still possible for a layman to attain to pure prayer while living in the modern world today? Anything is possible with God. There are people living in cities that have made great progress spiritually. It's been known to others who've told me, who are spiritual fathers, who've said that. There are people in the world, according to some of our contemporary saints in the 1990s anyway, who were living very ascetic lives, and the prayer was in them. They had the prayer, the Jesus prayer. So, yeah, I think it's possible. But, of course, every time someone is making progress in prayer, they're living a very strict life no matter where they are. In other words, when you say living in the modern world today, it depends. What do we mean by living in the modern world today? If you're going to live a modernist secular life, no, you're not going to make progress in prayer. But if you're going to, in spite of all of this, you're going to carve out for yourself basically a refuge in your home, silence, prayer, divine services as much as possible, an ascetic life, prayer, fasting, all the rest, then, how much room do you need? Do you need, 12 by 12, 50 by 50? What do you need? You really don't need much room. The ascetics lived in very small quarters. And of course, we have many saints who were in prison and were made holy in terrible conditions. So I don't think we should ever look at the externals and say, it's impossible. It depends. It's going to require a lot of struggle and discernment and, of course, spiritual guidance. But wherever you are today, you can still make progress as long as you're in the flesh and in this world, and the second coming is not happening. It's degrees of difficulty, not impossible. Most important thing, we would have good spiritual direction. I think that's the most important thing. And discernment over time, acquiring discernment. That doesn't come without humility and much love and prayer. I'm alarmed today more than I have been in the past. I guess my events have caught up with me, by a segment of converts in the church who are spending or who are approaching the faith in a very rationalistic way, spending the vast majority of the time in debates, discussions, or other rationalistic intellectual activity as if that's all they need, and that's the bread and butter of being an Orthodox Christian. and they don't really need prayer, fasting, pilgrimages, divine services, feast days. This is so, I just never thought that there would be people like that. Frankly, it's so obvious that that is all the center of the church's life. And I'm shocked that there seem to be not a small amount of people who are becoming Orthodox, but remaining essentially unchanged in their way. They're not being transformed or transfigured in their whole way of life. And they're not reorienting sufficiently to put prayer, fasting, divine services at the center of the life. And so they resemble, they're Orthodox maybe, on an ideological, theological level, but they don't resemble Orthodox Christians. So that is a grave danger if people aren't being properly initiated and catechized and taught what it means to be, what's the hierarchy of things. Then they could, they could become great teachers of orthodoxy and end up outside the church at the end of the day, because in terms of the way, they never entered into the church. That's a frightening thing. So be careful today. So anyway, back to the questions. What are some signs of possession? So it's hard to say because they're not limited to one or two signs, right? So there's a lot of things, but generally speaking, loss of the free will at times, being dominated by the demonic presence, not so much, not necessarily as a fruit of the demonic presence, a licentious life, although licentious lives and giving rights to the enemy can lead to a demonic possession. Blasphemy is the main reason people become possessed. When they blaspheme the Lord and reject him and speak ill, doubt. So possession, in my limited experience and understanding, is when you're doing and saying things that just do not jive and don't seem to be, you're not in control and you're not able to control the demonic presence. That's one way, one manifestation of possession. I don't know. I don't think it's just that, but that's one. Would it have been appropriate to walk out of the church when Opilo was co-anointing the cardinal on Good Friday? Well, I'll just address it generally and say this. When someone is trampling upon the holy canons, the boundaries of the church, the tradition of the church, openly in the midst of the people of God, for whatever that might be, certainly praying with heretics is forbidden by the holy canons. And so what's the role of the faithful? Well, it has to be something, right? It can't be indifference. It can't be passivity. It can't be, oh, he's in charge. I don't know, whatever he says. That's not, and it never has been, an Orthodox understanding of the role of the faithful in such circumstances. What exactly you do, there's probably different cases in different times. We can see in church history that there's some very bold confessors who, for instance, when they went to take the first icon off in iconoclasm from the very large icon of Christ over the entry to the palace, I think it was, we had I think it was a lady who went and, took the ladder from out underneath the soldier, and he I think was killed from the fall because it was quite high, and she was eventually, I think, martyred. So you have bold actions on the part of the faithful. What you cannot have is simply passivity and indifference. That means you are partaking and participating in the delusion, right? You're saying, I agree. Doesn't bother me. I don't have a problem. So if you're in a church where there's prayer with heterodox, I think you should depart. You should not depart necessarily from the congregation immediately or from the diocese. That would be not very helpful. And you can play a role in helping many other people be educated and understand. You can, of course, write the bishop, the priest, go through the various levels of authority. That's how it's always been. That's how you work. There's a lot of other things that could happen. We need, case by case, someone to be guided. Giving a one-size-fits-all, do this in this case, I think is unwise. Depends on a lot of things. Depends on how egregious it is, how intransient the person is. Depends on other things, other factors, your own spiritual state, whether you're prepared to do things that might be very challenging and then understand what you have to do. You know, there's a lot of things. So that's why you have a spiritual father. And that's why you're guided by a spiritual father to understand what you need to do in each case. But generally, the principle for sure, without doubt, is that passivity, indifference is not blessed. You will be accounted as essentially indifferent to the suffering of Christ and the church, because these things are essentially undermining the life of the church. They're undermining the boundaries of the church. They're undermining salvation of the souls of the heterodox, who are now misled to think that they're already in the church, misleading the faithful to think that the church is not one holy Catholic and apostolic. I mean, there's a lot of consequences immediately. And if you love Christ and you love the church and you love the people who are either deluded or being deluded, deluding or being deluded, you can't be indifferent. So steps, immediately as a layman, you have a variety of steps. I just said a few, and not going along with it is the basic step. Praying fervently, making your stance known to the others, not participating indifferently in things that are contrary to the faith of the fathers. We wouldn't be Orthodox today, brothers and sisters, if we were indifferent and blindly obedient to bishops and patriarchs and priests who were apostate or falling into apostasy. Like, we would not be here today. There would be no orthodoxy. If we said, "Oh, it's a false union, let's just abide by whatever the bishops say because they know better." Whoever's telling you that is either ignorant and does not follow and read the lives of the saints, or is intentionally misleading you. In both cases, don't listen. But don't fall into the temptation on the right either, where you depart from the body of the church, the community of the church. You depart from the struggle. You depart and you don't follow the saints. We just talked about a portion will be written off. The devil wants you out. He wants you out of the fight. He wants you out of the community of the church. He wants you irrelevant. That's what he wants. Follow the saints, follow the fathers, follow the clergy who are faithful. Resist those who are innovating. And God ultimately will turn things around. He always has. And he has done it many times without any human intervention. St. Maximus the Confessor reposed. 20 years later, you had the council that justified him. We don't know of any particular great leader that like St. Maximus, was so instrumental. So God turns things around, saves the church over time, but we have to cooperate. If we want to be faithful, we want to be a part of the church, we have to be in synergy, right? In this case. So just the short answer is I would have not stayed there and participated in what is essentially a travesty, right? It's a travesty for the Orthodox and for the non-Orthodox. It's a tragedy and a travesty. Father, is communism worse than capitalism? I've heard you say capitalism is evil, but this video also says communism is, so I shouldn't align with any of them. So what is capitalism? I mean, in terms of an economic system that basically is based on principles, is it based on principles of the gospel? Is it based on philanthropy, love of neighbor? What is it based on? What is it that inspires us to embrace it? First of all, do you have a choice? Like, are you in a place where you can choose? I'll follow communism or I'll follow capitalism. We're just pilgrims on this going to embrace the ideology. We're not going to imagine the ideology or the system to be something that is reconcilable with, the gospel. So they're both godless. That was what I've always said. They're both godless. And so it depends what you're talking about. You're talking about communism strictly as an economic system. You're talking about it's really not. It's also a political system, and it, of course, is almost always atheistic, if not always. Capitalism also is based on the passions and based on a kind of a godlessness. So I'm not sure what to tell you. We don't align with ideologies and systems as Christians anyway, do we? Align with them? I don't know. You would have to give me more specifics. Like, in what way would you align with it, and how are you at? What are you asking to pledge yourself to it, or something? What that would be more, I think, easy to answer. Father, can Father speak to the issue of deaconesses being created in Alexandria? Was that a one-off thing or the start of a trend? I will come back to that in a minute. Let me just say to Justin, my coworker, for some reason, my mouse is not working to go down further. 3 more questions, and then I cannot see them. I don't know what's going on with my mouse. Let me see if I get rid of these other ones. Okay, if I get rid of them, then they come up. That's what I'll do. And that way I can see them. Okay. So I've answered those already. All right. So to answer this question, we've dealt with the question of deaconesses in a podcast with Father Patrick, Deacon Patrick Mitchell. So I go to that podcast, watch that podcast if you want to learn all about that. We're going to probably do another one in the future. And so we explain why the return of deaconesses is not blessed, not a good idea. It's not necessary. It's not done for the right reasons, and it's a pastoral, train wreck. But beyond that, and we've produced papers in the past from the seminaries, and he's got his book, The Disappearing Deaconesses. And beyond that, however, there is the question of that actual what looked to be the ordination that happened in Zimbabwe. And from what I can see, and from everybody else is seeing, this is a total innovation, even in the sense that it's not even following what they did in the ancient church. It has essentially made a woman that functions like a male deacon, which was not the case, has never been the case in the church. They don't serve in the divine liturgy. They don't do petitions. They don't commune the people in the church. All of that is an innovation on the part of the bishop. So for that reason, again, even more so, clearly this is a very grave departure from Holy tradition. It will, unfortunately, now create divisions among the Orthodox, and it's a terrible. This is what innovation does. This is what heresy does. It succeeds in dividing the Orthodox, and whoever does this and doesn't follow the Holy tradition is in a very difficult and bad spot if they don't repent. If they're going to be responsible for provoking divisions in the church, innovating, departing from holy tradition, and creating these divisions, God help them to repent for doing that. There's no need ever to do that. And there's also, even if he was doing what they did in the ancient church, there's no real need for that either. So it's a very unfortunate development for the church on several levels. It's clear that the proponents in America, especially very outspoken proponents, are not following the Holy Fathers, not following the Holy Tradition, and they're itching for things that have never been taught or done by the church. Supposedly, out of some pastoral need, doesn't exist. There's no essential pastoral need for the return of deaconesses. So, will it be a start of a trend? I really don't know. I don't think anybody expected him to do what he did, generally, or particularly the particular innovation I just mentioned. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say whether he is the first of many. I don't think so, but I wouldn't be surprised if a couple more follow him in certain parts of the church today. Do you have to have a beard if you're in the clergy? Well, yeah, basically you do, because a man does not shave like a woman. A man does not, especially in the clergy, it's not seen as something that's, they would shave men who are defrocked or who are suspended or who are punished. That was a part of the sign that they were not a legitimate priest or a priest that was suspended or a priest that was defrocked. So that just tells you immediately that the beard was seen as part and parcel of the priesthood. And for men generally, I mean, if you read St. Nicodemus, all men should have beards. So it's why God gave us beards. Now, whatever that beard is, right? It doesn't even matter. It doesn't really matter. And the fact that people care is a worldly thing. In fact, the fact that there are people they're like men who are like women today, and they're sitting there fawning over their beard. Like it's just bizarre. Like they go and buy all this stuff to help their beard, be softer and, deeper. And what is that? Like, who cares? Why do you care? It's worldly and feminine to sit there and pour over your face in any way, whether you got a beard or not. It's not, you don't find it in the lives of the saints. You don't find it in the lives of the ascetics. You don't find it in the glorified, deified ones. They don't have mirrors in their bathrooms. They don't pour over their face and say, well, how do I look today? This is vanity. This is a vain way of life. And we've taken for granted that this is normal. We've taken for granted this is virtuous, that it doesn't matter, like it's indifferent. So, this might sound really harsh. I'm being really harsh right now. I'm just trying to drive home for everybody. I think reorient ourselves a bit on what's important and what's the hierarchy. What is necessary to be well kept, to be presentable, so you're not a scandal, so you don't distract people. Yes, that's fine. Comb your hair, put it right. Take your showers, whatever you need to do to be presentable. But beyond that, using gels and making it beautiful and making it this, making that, you start to get in the realm of just vanity. And it's not going to help you in the spiritual life. It's not going to help you draw close to Christ. Do you want to be with Christ? That's the question. The self-denial, why is it necessary we have so many aspects and so many levels of self-denial? Because we're sick. Because we're inclining toward the passions. Because we're inclining toward vanity all the time. And so this is a part of the process of purification and health, that we get back to the essentials. What God gives us is so much greater and beautiful, so much more authentic and deep than anything we can create on externals, on the external level, by pouring over the externals of man, right? Proper clothing, modest hats or whatever. These things are blessed. For the sake of order, for the sake of certain, basic modesty and presenting oneself. But beyond that, it doesn't matter like what your beard looks like. It doesn't matter really how long it is or whatever. All these things are insignificant. And so, yeah, in the clergy, men have beards. That seems to be going back forever, right? And then in the canons, it's enshrined, and in the tradition of the church, it's enshrined. I've never found in the old country any priest that didn't have a beard. In America, you find that, sure. But in the old country, you don't find it. I don't remember anybody walking around without a beard as a priest. I assume you've read the recent interview with Archbishop Leo Forest. How are we supposed to combat this? Okay, we kind of responded to this already. I don't think I need to add any more to that. Everyone who's in a position of teaching, authority, a priest, a bishop, a professor, if they're teaching on the faith, they need to teach the faith on this issue. Everything that he's talking about that is not consistent, it needs to be pointed out. Whoever's saying it in the church, it doesn't matter if it's the patriarch or the archbishop or the layman, if they're departing from the teaching of the fathers and the saints, that needs to be countered with sound Orthodox teaching. Everyone is co-responsible in the church. Everyone bears one of those burdens. Everyone has a part to play. Even if you're just a little catechist in a little parish in Idaho, you have a part to play. If you see that people are erring, sick in a particular way, you see that this is a trend. You see this is somebody in your parish or not in your parish, but it eventually get to your parish. You don't have to wait for it to come to your parish, this deluded idea, right? Teach on it. Go and teach on it and show the people how they need to understand these things. It's all of this adds and brings to bear the therapeutic program of the church. If you, for instance, if you consider something to be not a sin, which is a sin, in other words, you consider something that is not an obstacle to communion, which is an obstacle to communion, well, you're not going to get healed. It's that simple. If you teach that to other people and they also agree, yes, this thing, sodomy in this case, fornication, adultery, whatever it might be, pick your, sexual perversity, the various sexual perversities that happen in a marriage, all these things we've talked about on this channel many times, and we've got a podcast on sexual relations within marriage. It's called The Hard Truths. You can look it up on our channel. Go watch it. The whole thing. Many patristic witnesses to what is the boundary. What are the boundaries, right? We're trying to help people understand the boundaries, because if you don't stay on that narrow path, you're not going to get healed. That's the whole point. Why are we here? Why am I talking to you right now? Why do we have, the scriptures? Why do we have the canons? Why do they exist? To heal you and I and every human being, to return us to communion with God. All right. So now someone's standing here in our midst as a teacher telling us that, in fact, a sin, a missing of the mark, is not a missing of the mark. It's not an obstacle for people to become participants in the church's life. It's not an obstacle for one to be an Orthodox Christian. One can baptize, chrismated, communed, and they can participate in the mysteries. That seems to be what's being implied to me. I don't know. I mean, otherwise, what's the point? Have them as in the coffee hour? Like, don't exclude them from being physically in the church. I don't think that nobody comes just to be physically in the church. We all are there to commune, right? That's what it means to be in the church. If you're going to church every Sunday, indifferent to communion, or you are in the church, but you never commune, you're actually not in the church. Communion is the key, right? Participating in the holy mysteries. That's why when people fall away from that and they fornicate or they commit adultery or sodomy or whatever else might be, the various masturbation, whatever it is that is the sickness that people are not fighting against, right? And they're sick, then the church can say, don't commune, right? And that's very grave, and it's very serious, and it's very problematic. And we should be distraught. Lord have mercy. I'm cut off from God. I'm cut off from communion because of this habit, this sin, this choice that I'm making. I don't want to be cut off from God. I'm going to abandon that to be with God, right? It's really basic. But we have to say these things because people, if you're going and you're saying, I'm just not going to commune for the next 6 months. I never commune. I commune once a year. I commune once every 5 years. Well, you're actually not in communion with God, outside of that once. If you're intentionally indifferent, I'm saying, if you're going there and not wanting to commune, if you're going there thinking it doesn't matter. Now, if you can't commune because you're in prison or you're in the desert, that's a different issue, obviously, right? And it's not applicable to us. We're in church every Sunday. So obviously, if what we're talking about here among those who are pushing this, it's not just one bishop. It's a whole cadre of intellectuals and people in different places who are of this world, right? They're talked about in the book of Revelation tonight. And they're telling us that we don't need to follow the ascetic life, the narrow path, what's been handed down to us. But in fact, this grievous departure from what God intends and what is consistent with his commandments and what is considered to be a healed human being. This is a grievous departure from this. Well, it's not actually a grievous departure. Actually, it's reconcilable. And actually, we got it wrong. And actually, we can be in the church, participate in the mysteries, and engage in various sexual practices, which are natural, or we were born with that. None of this is the Orthodox Church's teaching for 2,000 years. All of us are co-responsible. All of us, even you who are in the corner there, who just say your prayer rule and go to church on Sunday and don't know anything and you're just learning. You're co-responsible because you're in the body, because you're a member of the body. And you are, how am I co-responsible, Father? You have pain of heart. You're weeping when you pray. You're calling on God to enlighten those who are in darkness. You're calling on God to bring those who are far away back to the church, not because you're special, but because you love them. And so these are the people. These people who are teaching these things are far from the narrow path. They're leading people away. They're essentially quack doctors, right? Excuse me. They're doctors who aren't healing anybody because they're not healed themselves if they're teaching this. To teach this, whatever it is, whatever delusion or heresy it is, there are many churches, or the church is divided, or whatever the heresy is that you're teaching. Christ is not fully God, or whatever the heresy is. To teach that you are sick. You have fallen into delusion. You've fallen into a sickness. Doesn't mean you're a heretic per se, unless you fight the church on it. Then you become a heretic. You could just be in error. Well, people who are in error can still, they're still a part of the church, but they're probably not going to make much progress. And so we're very concerned with them. We want to help them. We love them. If they teach it and promote it and defend it, well, now they're standing against the teachings of the church, right? One thing to have a personal error. I think this, but I'm wrong, right? I have a personal error on this. I just don't get it. I get it wrong. I've never really spent much time with it. I think this, then I learned, no, that's not the case. That's one thing. We're all doing that, right? All kinds of people who are in error today in the church because we're uneducated, we're uncatechized. We can't know everything. We might be very well educated in the church and just not know about certain things, right? And so we learn eventually, God willing, and whatever. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, I'm going to tell you how it is, and this is St. Paul that got it wrong. Canons don't apply them. We don't need to listen to Saint so-and-so. That's what we're dealing with, right? So that's a totally different ballgame. And so this is going to require, as it has again and again throughout church history, confessors, perhaps martyrs, but certainly Christians on their knees, Christians confessing the faith, Christians standing against the innovators, Christians going out into the desert to pray like in the 4th century because they didn't want to pray with the heretics. Christians getting exiled. I mean, this is how the church, look at the 4th century, look at all the great heresies, long-suffering, confession of faith, exile, all the rest. That's a part and parcel of many saints' lives. And they were made saints through that. So if we want to be saints today, we got plenty of opportunities. Exile, all the rest. It's all right there. We can do it. Not hard. But we got to go deeper, be well established, and have a blessing from our spiritual father and go deeper, right? So another way to say, what can I do? Go to your spiritual father. Go to the local priest who's very faithful. Go to the monastery nearby and say, what can I do? I don't want to be indifferent to this. It's a threat to our unity. It's a threat to our therapeutic program. It's a threat to my neighbors. It's a threat to the converts who are going to look at this and say, the Orthodox Church teaches that it doesn't matter if you engage in sodomy, you can still be deified. No, the church doesn't teach that. Well, there's so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so teaching it. Well, I don't want to be an Orthodox Christian if that's what they teach, right? I've heard that already. You've heard that. So I love that person who wants to be Orthodox. I am in pain when he tells me that. I can't be indifferent to this departure from Orthodoxy. This applies across the board with all kinds of things, doesn't it? Not just this latest egregious departure, which is, gross, on a gross level. Does the bread and wine still turn into the body and blood of Christ, even if the liturgy is being celebrated by a female deacon? Yeah. That's the kind of question you go to I don't, has that ever happened before? But first of all, female deacon, as we just said a couple questions ago, never served in the divine liturgy as a deacon. So it's never been an issue. So this is a totally new thing, literally totally new, never done ever in the history of the church. They never served as deacons. They're not in the priesthood. They didn't become readers, subdeacons, and deacons. She did not become a reader, subdeacon. I don't think she did. I didn't hear that. It's reader, subdeacon, deacon, right? They never did that. There was one laying on of hands or blessing for one thing, and that was it. They never went up or down. They never, in other words, they never went through the ranks and became that. That's all they became. This is apparently not what happened. And if it did happen, then he's having her do things that the deacon never did. And he's dressing her as a deacon. So total innovation. I have no idea what to say in terms of your question because it's never been dealt with before. My guess is that, yes, the body and blood of Christ would still would still be changed, because at this point anyway, we don't have any like condemnation by a synod. We don't have any heresy per se. I mean, is there a heresy here that they're teaching? Maybe by implication, there's heretical things, like if he's talking about changing the roles of men and women, that seems to be implied. Maybe that would be a heretical idea. It's hard to say what they're going to do with that, how they're going to develop it. I think there's a lot of implications, but it remains to be seen exactly how the church is going to deal with it and what they're going to see as implied on a dogmatic level. Father, I have a homosexual relative. I don't know how I could tell him his error, because didn't many saints say to focus on our own passions and not concern ourselves with other passions? Absolutely, we focus on our own passions. Absolutely, we're not going to sit in judgment of other people and their passions. But is that really what's at stake here? Is that really what you're talking about? If you look at, we have to make a distinction here. We're all sick. We're all sinners. We're all in a hospital. We're not going to sit around and judge each other because they're sick. Hey, you're sick. So am I. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? But we're not talking about that right now. When we say I have somebody who's homosexual and they're living it and defending it, that's equivalent to me being a thief, being an angry SOB, right? And saying, that's how I am, and I ain't changing. And you need to accept that as consistent with the gospel. At that point, we have not just a passion that somebody's succumbing to against their, unfortunately they didn't want to, not just, slow to heal, long-term care. No, that's not what we're dealing with. We're talking about somebody standing in the middle of the doctor saying, you doctors, you don't even know what it means to be sick. You doctors over here and you people in the sick beds, you're not sick. Get up. You have no problem. Okay, wait a minute. You're crazy. You're insane. You don't even know what you're talking about. You're deranged. You are sick. I'm sick. We're all sick. Don't tell me that this is not a sickness, because everybody for 2,000 years, well, actually 5,000 years, have said this is a sickness. And you need to be healed from it. So if you don't want to be healed and you're insisting that we accept you as healed already, or as not, at least in this aspect, you're not sick, then we have a double problem. Now we have a second problem. We have a problem on this level, right? The level of will and mental capacity and maybe derangement, or I don't know what, because now we're saying something very different than just, I'm a sinner and I struggle with this. God help me. There's no problem there. I mean, if you got this problem and you are struggling against it, you're in the church, God give you strength, right? We've had people who were struggling with these passions, fornication, sodomy, and they became saints. Say Mary of Egypt, of course, famously, but many others. And so that in and of itself is not a problem. Like, that's not a problem. If you're struggling against the passion, you recognize that is a passion. That's a problem. I can't do that anymore. But you fall, get up, fall, get up. That's all of us. Again, we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with somebody who says, I am not sick. Recognize me as healthy. No, we're not going to do that. Because we love you. We're not going to tell you that you're deranged. It's not true. You need to be healed. No. I was born that way and I can never change myself. And you can't change me. And God wants me this way. Okay, well, now we're talking about heresy, because that's saying that God wants you this way. Now we have like a moral teaching that is being totally countered and distorted. And God is now behind this. Well, okay, now we're on another level of distortion. You see, it's not about concerning yourself with his passion. It's about concerning yourself with somebody who is in derangement and needs to understand the nature of like what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a Christian. It's on a very basic level of what it means to be healed. It's a question of what is healing, what is health. After the war, will Greeks and Russian church come back together? Well, I don't think here's my response. We're not really separated as it is. And you'll say, well, yeah, we are. We have this like big separation. Well, yes and no. We have a separation on one level, but on a basic level, we're not separated. In other words, there's all kinds of people going back and forth between the Russian church and the Greek church, communing in certain parts of the Russian church, certainly in the Greek church. And there's no real split in terms of dogma or recognition of saints or anything. This is a gross and what's the word? Politically driven by a certain agenda. So when that leaves, then this aberration called the Ukrainian schismatic sectarian church, whatever you want to call it, is going to leave, and the cause of the scandal will leave. So it's not in my experience in the Church of Greece, most people are against what happened. Most people on the ground, amongst the people. I'm not saying the bishops. The bishops, unfortunately, are many of them going along with it. Some of them willfully, many of them willfully. So we do have a major problem. We have a major break on the level of the episcopacy, but essentially that's it. I don't see it beyond that. I don't yet. Could get worse and worse in terms of a theological, dogmatic break. I hope not. But I hope to God that it's going to be when this generation passes, when this leadership changes, when God helps the church and brings in a new crew, then the causes will be like if many of the abbots and many of the monks in Greece were tomorrow's bishops, this thing would be over immediately because they're not in agreement. They don't want this. They don't agree with this. So thoughts on the Marble King? Forgive me if I got that name incorrect. So that's another day, another topic. Actually, I'm going to be going on DPH's podcast, DPH David Patrick Harry. That's next Wednesday, and I'll be talking about the prophecies. So let's leave that to next Wednesday. Justin, come back on Wednesday, next Wednesday, and we'll talk about the prophecies. We'll talk about the Marble King. By the way, also this Friday I'll be going. No, it's Wednesday, next Wednesday. What am I talking about? That's the only one that's coming up. That's the big one. Karen says, Karen's kids. Many people say the U.S. will fall and we should leave it, but I see that leaving would be difficult. And where would we go? Yeah, I agree with you. So did you see the answer, Karen, or whoever's Karen's kids, that Metropolitan Neophylos gave at the conference we did down in Alabama? Did you see that answer? It was a great answer, and he said basically no, just stay put, and it's beyond this. But I direct you to his answer. Go to that. I think we even did it. Did we do a excerpt for that? I think we did an excerpt just of that. But if you don't, go to the interview we did, posted on Orthodox Ethos YouTube channel and elsewhere from the conference in Alabama on the Eighth Ecumenical Council. We talked to Metropolitan Neophytos, and he answers this whole question because somebody asked him, "Should I leave America?" Because there's going to be big destruction in America according to the prophecies. The coasts are going to be destroyed, or whatever the different interpretations are. And I mean, it is of concern. We should all be very concerned that difficult days are coming. Even people in the world are all saying this, right? You don't have to be an Orthodox Christian with prophecies to figure out that this country, America, and the West generally, but America is in major crisis. And there's going to be difficult days ahead, and difficult days economically, and difficult days morally, I mean, in terms of socially in the community. And we should be preparing ourselves. It's not hard. Now, how should we be preparing ourselves? Mainly spiritually, also materially, and in terms of our community, in that order, probably, connecting with your fellow Orthodox Christians or your neighbors, and just preparing yourself for difficult days. I don't know what that form will take. There's a lot of people talking about breakdown of society, massive economic crisis, not being able to have electricity. There's all kinds of speculation. It is speculation. A lot of it you can't really even prepare for. Some of you can prepare for. Some of us don't have much money, right, to spend. Some of us are living from a check to check. A lot of these people who are online saying you got to prepare. They're talking about investments of thousands upon thousands of dollars, which most people don't have. So do what you can do. prepare yourself, but I don't think fleeing to Chile or something, or, going to Russia, you can do that. I think it's not a bad idea. If you're going to go anywhere, go to a place where you're going to have daily services, a monastery nearby. Move to one of the monasteries in America, close to the monasteries. If you're going to move overseas, move to a country like Romania, where there's monasteries everywhere. The main thing you want to be around is Christ, right? Which is the divine liturgy, which is the communities, which are the monasteries where they're going to be serving it. That makes sense. Like, that makes a lot of sense to me. But fleeing from, New York to Chicago, or from Chicago you got to have better criteria, like go spiritual criteria, and then don't live in fear. We're all going to die. I don't know. I know that's a news flash to most of you, but we're actually going to die. We're going to die, and could be tomorrow, and it could be in 30 years. I don't know. 40 years, who knows? But we're going to die. So we need to prepare every day for death and not be attached to the passing vain world. That is for everybody, forever, for every day, right? It has nothing to do with America or what's going to happen to America. If we do that, then we'll be fine. We'll be fine. Whatever comes, whatever happens, we'll be fine. How was Mount Athos functioning pre-1912 when Central Macedonia wasn't officially under Elas? Does this have to do with my lecture? Did that come up? I'm not following, but Mount Athos in 1912 was still under, or was just coming out of, what was it? What was the liberation of Macedonia? I forget. 1916, 1918. What was it? I forget. It was before World War I, right? Or on the verge of it. I can't remember. In any case, it would have been under the Ottomans, and then it came under the new Greek state. What's the question exactly? I'm not sure. I'm not following the question. God help you. Good struggles to you, whoever you are, your name I don't see. God help you. God give you strength. Father, when praying my nightly prayers for the deceased, should I only pray for reposed Orthodox Christians or anybody? Anyone. You can pray in your prayer rule for everyone and anyone. We don't pray in the Proskomedian church or in the entrance, because this is the image of the kingdom, is the image of those who want to be there, it's the image of those who've been initiated into that mystery. But in our private prayer, we can pray for everyone and anyone. Maybe just put it in an order, right? Make an order to your prayers so that you, have an order and you're not just all over the place. That would probably be a good idea. All right, what's next? Father bless, I was reading prophecies of St. Andrew the Fool for Christ. He mentions the Riparieni, who were imprisoned by Alexander the Great, being set free towards the end of times. Thoughts? Not familiar. I wish I was. Sorry, I'm not really familiar with it. I did read that. Don't remember that. I should do some research here, but so I can't really answer you. I do not know what he's talking about. Now, having said that, there is some people, some contemporary people do push back against this prophecy of St. Andrew the Fool for Christ. Some people doubt it. Some people say it's really not easy to understand. And it doesn't play a massive role in it doesn't have a massive presence in when I sit down to examine the prophecies. It was a fairly minor, portion of the big picture. That's all I can say at this point, but I'd have to do more to talk about that. I don't know. Good question though. Wish I could answer it. What do you think of Jay Dyer doing Twitter debate live streams on Holy Friday? Do you think this kind of behavior is setting a poor example for newcomers, like you mentioned earlier? Jacob, I really appreciate Jay Dyer's work. Appreciate him as a human being in terms of all that he pours into it. Right, he's helped a lot of people. And so I'm not inclined to say anything ill of Jay, but if anybody is this applies to anybody, including Jay, in my opinion. If anybody is spending Holy Friday or Holy Saturday or Pascha or any of these very holy days in, basically on talking and online or talking on the phone for hours or anything, they're missing out. They're obviously missing out because the example of the saints, if you go to the saints, what do the saints do on these holy days? I mean, read St. Paisius in his writings, how much emphasis he puts, or Elder Frem, how much emphasis they put on you spending these days poring over, being in church, poring over the services, praying, participating, being edified, being shaped, being inspired by the divine services. It's such a basic part of our Christian life, but even more so for anybody who is going to be a teacher in the church, to be a presenter of orthodoxy. It's essential that we're being fed spiritually, we're participating deeply in the divine services. So much of our dogmatic consciousness comes from the divine services. St. John Maximovich would reference them often, and you saw them as a source of dogmatic teaching. So missing out on that, if that's what happened, I mean, I don't know, but or possibly encouraging other people not to go, or by instead be online, I think that's a mistake. Yeah, that's a mistake. It's a tragedy for all of us. For anybody who's going to miss out on divine services, it's sad. God help us. God help us to go deeper and not miss, because this life is short, right? And it's dangerous when we distance ourselves from the divine services. I think it's St. Isaac the Syrian or St. John of Climacus, I can't remember, who says anybody who's anybody who distances themselves from the divine services is on the way out of the church, basically, is in danger spiritually. So we do not want to distance ourselves from the divine services, especially the holiest days of the year. That would be a tragedy. Or encourage other people to do that, or give example of doing that. That would be, even if we didn't, let's say we're on Twitter, but then we went to the divine service, we are probably misleading people, thinking that it's not important to go to church because we're online on that day. So I think it's, I think we should avoid it. I listened to Jesse Peterson, and he has this idea that most of these issues come from women taking the men's place is where Orthodox truth, men's place is. Taking the men, we need to put periods and capital letters so I understand how to read your sentence. Most of these issues come from women taking the men's place. Is there Orthodox truth to this? He says women are evil and the origin of evil. No. Women are not evil. God have mercy on us. And the origin of evil is not women. The origin of evil is the fall of Lucifer, and then listening to Lucifer and disobeying God. And so we're not going to identify evil with any created being. Evil doesn't exist. The evil one exists. Evil itself does not exist. So basic error in terms of understanding the nature of evil. Evil does not exist, because if it did, God created it, and God doesn't create evil. So it's the absence of light. It's the absence of communion. It's the absence of obedience, right? That's what essentially is the problem. I don't know who Jesse Peterson is, and certainly feminism is highly destructive of society. We need to do a live stream on feminism eventually. It's very problematic for women, of course. First and foremost, it destroys women and their roles, but also their femininity and their happiness, their joy. That's the first thing that it destroys. Father Bless, is morality created or uncreated? How did morality come to be? What is morality? Well, that's the first thing you need to ask. What is morality? For morality, simply put, the ethos, the Orthodox ethos, where we get ethics from, right? The Greek word for ethos is where we get ethics from. So, is the way of Christ and participation in the divine energies. is the way you acquire the Orthodox ethos. So I guess in that sense, it's uncreated. And it's a participation of the created with the uncreated. It's a participation of man with God that brings about the transformation of his ethos, of his way of being. It's not the popular idea of some kind of law or way, ethical code or something. This derives from a way of life in Christ, and then you can see the boundaries and see where you should avoid because you don't want to fall away from that communion, and where you remain because you want to be in this communion. But we just posted actually a lecture that I gave. We've done so much to get rid of these little flies, and yet they're still here. I don't understand. It's annoying. They're the time of the year down here in Arizona, and so the lecture I think you should watch if you didn't maybe watched it, and that's why I have this question. I hope not, but we just posted, which from a conference at Jordanville a couple of years ago, and I talk about the Orthodox ethos with regard to what Western morality. So why don't you go check that out? Just posted 2 days ago on Orthodox ethos. So we're almost wrapping it up here. A couple more questions. Should I contact via email regarding asking about a specific priest? The one in my town says he is friends with Father Peter. Yeah, you can contact us. We'll try to get to you. We've got a lot of emails that I still haven't answered, but we'll do our best. It might be a quick answer. I can answer you. Hi, Father. Can you speak to the advancements of invasive nanotechnology and AI and what an Orthodox response to these technologies ought to be? Excuse me. Well, I don't know much about them, frankly. I don't have time to become an expert in everything, and I haven't become an expert on these things. Generally speaking, my spiritual directors tell me avoid AI, don't use it. And that's what I've done. And the little that I know and I see, like everybody else, it's, I think alarming, ultimately. It's getting us further and further away from real community, real communion, what we really need to be human. And so I think we, as Orthodox, we're not going to change the path. We should probably try to avoid it as much as possible. And it's okay. Like, we don't need to use it. Like, we were okay without it. The delusion will be going forward. The pressure from the world will be, well, you have to use this. This is amazing. Everybody's doing it, right? Your time, you need to do this because you need to save time and all the rest. And we should just simply resist that and remain, Luddites, in my opinion, because the distortion that will come with making this a part of our life is going to be potentially great. And it's just, on a spiritual level, it's just eerie. It's just bizarre and, more and more inhuman. So I think we should just avoid it. That's about all I can say to you. I've not analyzed it, what the implications are for our civil freedom and all the rest. I have not spent time doing that. So maybe I should. Maybe that's, can only do so much though. If I have a disease that will take my life soon, should I avoid going to the doctor and save my life rather than losing it for Christ, praying for him to decide if it is my time to go? How do you know that the disease will take your life soon? Have you made an analysis? Have you gone to doctors? Have you done an analysis and assessment with your spiritual father and your doctor? I think that is a basic thing you should do. And then if there's treatment that is humane and has promise, then you should probably do the treatment. You should be obedient on one level. If it's determined that medical human means are not going to change anything, there's nothing they can do, then of course, obviously, you're going to put all your trust in God and you prepare. Like, we also be preparing for our death and our departure. Frequent communion, confession, and deeper prayer, and turn to God. This is the case with the so-called blessed disease. St. Paisius talks about cancer, because many people turned their life around, reoriented when they got cancer, started getting serious about life in Christ, left this world in communion with God, whereas previously they were indifferent. And so if anything brings us closer to God, then it's a part of his, of course, pedagogy ultimately. And it's a blessed thing, right? Anything that, even bad things happen, they turn us to God. Like we lose somebody, it crushes us, but then we have a transformation and we have repentance and we see the vanity of this world, and then we turn to God and start to live for God. So there's no accidents. God has allowed this to come into your life. It's required of you to do what is basically necessary in your means to maintain good health. That's you respect the gift of life and the body which is given to you, and you want to treat it with respect. But we don't absolutize that. We don't make it like I got to live here forever. We don't go to extremes with that. But we do the basics for sure, and we do obedience to the doctor to a certain degree. But we remain oriented toward eternity, whatever the case may be. And we take these opportunities to draw closer to Christ. That's the most important thing. So I don't know. Did I answer your question? Hopefully I answered your question. You should definitely try to maintain good health on one level. Don't just ignore and say, I'm gonna go. I don't care about my health. I don't care about my body. I'm just gonna let myself die. That's not blessed. I don't think that I don't know of any saint who would just be so indifferent. Maybe there are some exceptions, but generally speaking, if we don't have the spiritual level they had and they don't see and understand, and we're very, still simple and beginners, then we need to take care of our body to the degree that we can. Yeah, to the degree we can. Do you have recommendations for homeschooling curriculums and methods? It's interesting. We're coming out with a new homeschooling book. So you may be interested in this new homeschooling book, and that is right here. Let me get rid of let me get rid of that. That's coming out in a month or so. Formation in the Love of Truth, Principles of Orthodox Education by yours truly from Archimandrite Press. So you may be interested in that. Beyond that, what can I recommend? We use Susan Wise Bauer. There's not any Orthodox complete curriculum that I know of. We use certain aspects of classical education, but not everything. The main focus that I talk about in the book and in my lectures is we need to focus on the early years, 0 to 5, and then 5 to 10, 0 to 5, very, very important. 1 to 5, very, very important years. And then as soon as they can start reading the lives of the saints and establishing a firm foundation in the life of the church and the mysteries of the church and the lives of the saints, they grow up feeding off the examples of the saints, the feast of the saints and the feast of the church. That'll be the greatest possible gift you can give to your children, more than any other knowledge, more than any other educational thing, is that they are well versed in the Synaxarion, the lives of the saints. Because when they see what it means to be a human being in those lives, in the scriptures, in those lives, when they're inspired to live like those saints, when they encounter the distortions in the world, and they encounter the provocations of apostasy, of other religions and all the rest, they'll have the armor and the discernment to see what is good and what is bad, what is distortions, and they'll have discernment through the many experiences of the saints that they've read about. So it's the most important thing you can give them if they want to survive as an Orthodox Christian. So buy the Synaxarion, read it on a daily basis, have them do book reports or whatever on the certain lives of the saints. And then also don't get too crazy and worried about certain books that everybody always talks about, which they think is the greatest since sliced bread, which are basically a part of this Western classical education curriculum, which are not that beneficial ultimately, but can be pushed back to high school. So keep things simple and direct and practical, more practical on the level of the, fifth, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh grade, right? Third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, especially. Keep them focused. Don't get carried away with super academic. I do think if they've got an inclination to language, it's really important that they can learn Greek and Latin. Very helpful to their brain development, but also to their future understanding of language, and of very helpful in their writing skills and all the rest. But that depends on the child. The child needs to have an inclination to that. All right, we can go on, but check out the book. It's coming out in a few weeks. Let's see what else we got. Your blessing. I don't want to learn Greek. I'm struggling with forcing myself. Of course, prayer and fasting will help, but do you have any practical advice? Go and live in Greece, first and foremost. If you can't do that, go live with a bunch of Greeks. Secondly, spend as much time learning, listening to and speaking whatever it is that you can speak Greek. You've got to immerse yourself. That's the best and easiest and quickest way to learn Greek. And for me, it would be the only way. If I had never gone to Greece and spent time and got married there and lived there, I wouldn't have learned Greek. I just don't think I would have learned. But that I did that, and I think I learned it pretty well, and I understand it, speak it very naturally. So that's the best way. If you can't do that, and many people can't, then the next best thing is to spend as much time with Greeks as possible around you, speaking it. As far as, what program, I really don't have any opinion on that. I don't know much about it because I never did that. If you don't want to learn Greek, why are you doing that? I don't know. It's not like you have to. So I think it's good, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. It's good, though. If you can do it, do it. It's good. Are women allowed to take a turn in carrying the epitaphial during Good Friday? This has been an issue in many churches. These issues are so kind of like just distractions. Like, these are things that we should never really talked about until the last 50 years or 30 years. What does it matter? Why is that an issue? I don't understand. Let the men do this and the women do that. If your church parish and your people received that tradition from the old country or from wherever, and that's what they did forever, time immemorial, men, because that's how it is in the old country, in the old villages, men do this. There's nobody even questions it. The men are going to be the church wardens. Sorry. The men are going to be the church wardens. The men are going to be whatever. The women are going to be this. They're going to be the ones that are going to put on the picnics or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're going to divide these things up, and that's how. That's going to be the tradition and the function of this community. And they just do that. And there's a lot of this is just egotism. Why can't I do this? Why does the men only do that? Why do the women only do this? It's so secondary. It's so secondary. So if we just had received what had been given and just do it, keep it simple and focus on the spiritual life, focus on things that matter, then these things would not be issues. So I don't know what to say about the epitaphial, because I don't think there's a universal 100% across the board in every Orthodox church, men only, although that certainly would be, I think, the norm. In my experience, I'm not super experienced, but I've been around a lot of churches. I've never seen women carrying the epitaphial. Is it a sexist thing? No, it's just the way it is. It's just what we received. And then the women are doing other things that the men don't do. Like they do all the flowers for the epitaphial. Men don't do that. They do whatever. So we're going to serve Christ. Who cares? Right? Men, let the men do it. Okay, if that's what we received, just let them do it. You go do something else. That's how I look at it. I think it's pretty simple. When we get trying to micromanage it, and then we get agendas or whatever, then that's when things just get distractions. Are there any food restrictions on Wednesday and Friday during the 40 days fast of Pascha? Food restrictions. Well, we're fasting. We're fasting on Wednesdays and Friday. The fast, only on Bright Week do we not fast on Wednesday and Friday. So that means we're fasting. So now is there oil? So there's some places where they eat oil and wine on those days. So they have a relaxation of the fast, and they include oil and wine. Other places, no, they don't do that. So you have to look at your parish or your bishop or whatever and what they're doing. It's in some monasteries, there's no relaxation for oil or wine unless it's a feast day. Other places, they do it throughout the Paschal period. That's the only difference I can see. You said doubt can lead to possession. I struggle with doubt at times. Does this mean I will be possessed? No, don't worry about it. Keep praying. Just ask God for faith. Is consciousness something that exists outside of the mind? No, not that I know of. Outside of the mind. What do you mean? Consciousness outside of the mind? No. Isn't consciousness the self-awareness of the human being? And the voice of God within us. I don't know what you mean outside of the mind. Christos says just a blessing would be appreciated. Thank you for the lecture. God bless you, Anula. Panagia Theodoki Soso din Anula. What is liturgy and what does it mean and how is it relevant? Wow, that's a whole lecture. I do actually have a series on the Divine Liturgy. I have a 10-week series on the Divine Liturgy. Did you know that? Go take advantage of it. You can get it. I think you can watch it on our YouTube membership. You can watch it on Crowdcast and on the orthodoxethos.com website. All right. Go follow this 10-week course on the Divine Liturgy. That's a massive question I'm going to pass tonight. I'm already getting too tired. How do I talk to people I love who are still in Protestantism? How do you talk to them? Are they interested in Orthodoxy? Are they asking you questions about Orthodoxy? Answer them. If there's no interest, you still want to talk to them because you're colleagues or your extended family or whatever it might be. I guess in a roundabout way, you could, approach the faith. Generally, when you have people who are not well disposed, you ask questions. Or you talk about things that are related but are not directly. You have to sense their openness. You have to sense their willingness to discuss. You can't make them understand. You can't bring them to faith, overnight or anything like that. So, by the way, did I say thank you to Anula? Thank you so much for your donation. I don't think I did. Thank you very much. So we have to learn discernment. Who are we talking to? How much disposition they have? Open up a conversation. Share with them if they're open, share with them your life. Share with them what you're learning. Share with them things you love. But generally speaking, focus on the church and the Orthodox, and you can be sucked away and you can be confused if you try to force it and try to spend all this time with them and you want to bring them in and don't do that. It's not going to help. Pray for them first and foremost. When you see them, love them. If they're interested, answer their questions. If they're not interested, ask them questions. All right, that's it. Let's see who we got. This is KB. Christos Anesti. Women allowed to take turn holding epitaphio during the procession of Holy Friday? Well, we've already answered that. Yeah, we've kind of answered that already. So thank you very much for your donation. I appreciate that. Hopefully the answer, I don't know if it helped. I hope it did. Is the Whore of Babylon the Roman Catholic Church? No, it's not. Whore of Babylon. We just went through this tonight. So if you watch the lecture, you know the answer. I'm going to let you watch the lecture. Catholicism or the Pope could be the figure of the false prophet. That's what we've talked about in the past. Because he's a representative of secularized Christianity, which is the spirit of Antichrist in the world, is this fake worldly Christianity. So, but that's different, isn't it? Father, those that have a platform to reach many are truly backed into a corner. We want to call out these issues, such as with the Archbishop. However, we don't want to undermine the church. Indeed, we all are in that position. We need to pray, and we need to have discernment, and we need to seek guidance on how we, each one in our own place, can best help the church when these heretical ideas are being taught. whether it be ecumenism or, fornication being made, normalized, whatever it is, we need prayerfully, humbly ask for guidance to say in each case, place, situation, parish. There's not one size fits all. Do what you can in your time and place, but don't be indifferent. I don't know what else to tell you. It is difficult, and you need discernment. It's not easy at all. I know that my homosexual uncle just died. Is it okay to pray for his soul, that his transgressions be forgiven after death? Not focused on his sins, just his soul, now that he's passed. You can definitely pray for anyone on your own, in your home, in your personal prayer. You can pray for anyone, and you should, and that God would have mercy, certainly. Not in church, of course, but in your private prayer. What does it mean to be healed by Christ? To be restored to the image and likeness, to be restored to communion, to live in communion, and to understand little by little the will and the desire of God for you in each and every moment. And that comes through the divine enlightenment when you've been purified and you're no longer living for the passions, and you're no longer living for the lower instincts, but you have now become dispassionate. That's a process. It takes time to be divested of the world, to be purified of the desires and the passions. It takes time, and that's a healing process that goes through. But the total healing looks like image, clear, clean, pure, likeness, in large measure in that direction, making much progress. So there's of course, endless. It's an endless progression. But likeness is to become like Christ. That's what he wants us to be like him. In other words, the virtues, acquiring all the virtues. So when you are angry, impatient, slothful, whatever, all these are signs that you're not healed. That there's aspects of your soul that are sick. You resist God's will. You're jealous. All these things, contrary to his likeness. You're not like him. I pray, beg for my faith to increase, and I believe and want to believe rather than attaining knowledge. Father Peter, is this very wrong? Knowledge is man's interpretation of, and faith is a direct line with God. The light of God is knowledge. The light of God brings knowledge. Communion with the light, being open to and receiving the light of God, is what brings knowledge of everything, ultimately. So when you stand in the light, what happens? Everything's illumined, and you see things as they are, and you understand how things are. So you seek communion, you seek union, you seek not knowledge, but communion with the light, which gives you knowledge. Faith is trust. So the more you trust God with everything in your every thought, word, and deed, impulse, glances, decisions, desires, the more you trust him, the more you will have a direct communion with him. What place would you say the concept of the Western Rite has in Orthodoxy? I've heard that certain saints supported it, but what do you think about it? I've answered this question many times. As you may know, I don't know, maybe you don't. When my father was an Anglican priest. He converted to Orthodoxy in 1992 with most of his parish. About 150 people became Orthodox with him in Concord, California, and they started a parish there, a Western Rite parish. And he was the priest from 92, I think 98 or 9, in this Western Rite parish, Holy Cross Orthodox Church. But over time, partly from my experience going around in different places, but their own experience as well, they realized that the expression and manifestation of the Western Rite in that parish, now that there are different parishes and even different expressions and experiences of Western Rite. So I'm not generalizing, but I can only speak from my experience. They realized over time that this is not working, that there's a problem here. There's things missing that they want. They realized that it's more or less like they were continuing as Anglicans in terms of the Typicon and all the services and everything. and they just got rid of certain things like the filioque. They realized they weren't fasting and praying with the church. They weren't celebrating the feast with the rest of the church. They realized this was a problem. That's what they realized. And they asked to be transferred. He was transferred. He was moved to a parish in London, Ontario. And so my experience going to that parish and going back and forth from the Western Rite Parish to the other places, the monasteries, was that there's a fairly big gap in day-to-day experience of orthodoxy. So that's on an experiential level. On a more theoretical level, when I think of what the Western Rite is trying to do, I just don't see how it's possible on a macro level, because tradition is passed on from generation to generation. And so you have a break. You have a break in tradition, right? So how's it passed on? Like, you can't, if you're going back and doing archaeology and trying to get something that was 1,000 years ago abandoned, that's no longer tradition. You're no longer passing it on. You're no longer receiving it. And in practice, in my experience, the Western Rite is doing much of what the liturgical development gives us in the 20th century. In other words, or 19th century. They're not doing liturgies that existed. They don't even probably know much about the liturgies that existed in the first millennium. And insofar as they do, it's hard to know how they were prayed in an orthodox manner. So anyway, I think there are wonderful people doing the Western Rite. I think that that they're Orthodox Christians, but I think there's a huge gap, and I don't see how they can fill it. And it's a real struggle, I think, to fill it on both practical and principle. So I'm not trying to diss anybody in the Western Rite. God bless you all. And there's many good things that I respect about what they're trying to do, like recovering the saints and the veneration of saints. We should all be doing that. Everybody, no matter Western or what or not. So we are at 3 hours. We just lost our contact over our website because there's only a 3 hour limit. So there's still plenty of questions. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all these questions tonight. Maybe. Okay, I'm seeing there's 6 more. I'll try to just blow through these as soon as I can here, because we don't usually go over 3 hours. So let's see. We've got like 6 left. Let's see. When Christ was on the cross and he said, Luke 23:44, then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. Was that towards those in that moment, or for all sinners whom he bared sin? I suppose it's always both and, but it's first and foremost for those in front of him. But because in a mystical way, we all participate through our own sin in the bubbling over of transgression and suffering of humanity. Like, we contribute one to another through our passions and sinfulness. We add that, as it were, to this cauldron of sin. In that sense, mystically, we all don't know what we're doing. Like, how many of us who are Orthodox sin and don't realize what we're doing and don't understand how we need to repent? I mean, how much more for those who don't know Christ? So yes, it's applicable to everybody, first and foremost to those in front of him, and then to the rest of us. What place do you think professors at Orthodox seminaries have who are not clergy? It seems to me that in the past, only clergy were teachers, but in modern times, this is not the case. I don't know about that. I don't know if that's the case, actually. There were monks who were teachers. There were, certainly in the 19th century Russia, we have lay teachers. And I had a lay teacher in my seminary, my theological school. There were a number of, most were not priests. So you can certainly be a very fine teacher of Orthodox theology and not be a priest. I don't think the priesthood necessarily is a requirement to teach properly. But what you can't be is an armchair speculative theologian. That's the problem. And we don't need any of those, and we don't want any of those. We want experiential theologians. Now, if you don't have experience, at least you need to quote and follow strictly those who do, and simply present their teaching. And that's what I try to do on this channel, successfully or unsuccessfully. I spend most of my time translating literally from Greek to English or presenting teachings that are already established by sources that are following the fathers or are fathers and have experience like the fathers. That's the most important thing, because we want, as priests and as teachers of theology in the seminaries, we want to communicate and be, as much as we can, mystagogues, in other words, initiators of people into the life of the kingdom, life of the church. We don't need speculative theologians for that at all. They're usually in error. And most of our problems today come from these types of speculative theologians in the academia. I think that's the problem. It's not so much that they're ordained or not. I'm 18 and acquiring the Orthodoxy. Welcome. God bless you. I've been wanting to learn the fullness of the faith and know the love of God and truth of God. What do I do? What do I do to learn to keep going? You're doing a pretty good job right here. You're here listening to the saints and the Elder Athanasios. Join us on Thursday. You can hear more. Follow the saints. Follow the Holy Fathers. Read the lives of the saints. All right. Most important thing, if you can attend divine liturgy, attend divine liturgy. Start as an inquirer. If the priest blesses, become a catechumen. But you need to sit at the feet of the saints. Read their lives and love them. If you do that, you'll make progress. All the rest, the catechism will come. Hello, Father. Can an Orthodox marry a Pentecostal without either one changing religions? The answer is no, unequivocally no. Why do I say that? Because that's what the canons of the church say. No matter what people do today, that's what the canons of the church say. Why? Because they're not in the church, and you are. How can you be united in Christ? You can't commune together. That's how we commune with Christ. How is it possible to be in Christ together? It's not on a theoretical level. It's not on a purely spiritual level. It's in the Eucharist. Because you're not just spirit, you're flesh and blood. And you've got to commune with God in your body as well as your soul. Well, he's not doing that. I'm assuming it's a he, maybe it's a she. The other one, who's a Pentecostal, is not doing that. In fact, they're in a group or a denomination or a sectarian group that is contrary to orthodoxy. It does not accept the faith. It is not a part of the faith. It is warring on certain levels against the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church and the faith once delivered. And so there will be not only not communion together, but there will be division. And there will be, if he is a zealous, faithful member of the Pentecostals, he's not going to accept the Orthodox teaching unless he departs from that and he embraces Orthodoxy, and then there's certainly a blessing. But you can't establish your house on the rock unless you're both in Christ, in the mysteries, united in the one faith, delivered from the saints and the apostles throughout the ages. What is your take on people that have been saying that the holy fire is blessed, although it's not a miracle? There's so many examples on video of the holy fire doing things that are unnatural, that cannot be done by human beings. I've seen the video. I've talked to the people who have experienced it, like Father Anthony in Thessaloniki, who was a doctor at the time and went and videotaped it and then became a priest because he was so moved by it. So what do I say to people who don't have experience? Go get some experience. That's what I say. Go get some experience and stop sitting theoretically from a distance. And if you are a cleric in the Church of Jerusalem and you don't have an experience of the Holy Fire, God help you. I don't know what to say. They're certainly possible today. There's apostasy all over the world. I don't know. But how can you not experience what we can see? Many people have come and gone and experienced that. And we've seen on video. I don't know what to say. Maybe you haven't experienced it. Maybe it does seem natural to you, but that might be more about you than it does the miracle, right? Father, I do know, or I don't know. I do know if I was too harsh or prideful. I told my friend that they are not Christian because they're not baptized, and now they have taken my words with offense. Am I in the wrong, Father? You always have to. You might not be in the wrong, and what you said might be right, and they might be proud, but you always have to take into consideration who you're talking to. You have to. It's called pastoral application, right? It's called discernment. So if they weren't ready to receive that and you said it in a way that was kind of impassioned, yeah, that's could be a problem. If they were asking and you were answering and you said, look, this is the way it is, there's only one baptism and it's in the Orthodox Church, and you explain things as best you can, then don't worry about it. So it depends. All right, we're going to shut it out. Oh, no, we're not. Wait a minute. We've got more in Crowdcast. Oh, I didn't know. I thought we were done in Crowdcast. All right, we got 2 more, and then we're done. Father, this is from Mary. You still around, Mary? I'm cradle Orthodox and grew up understanding that nothing should be drunk or eaten after midnight in order to take communion the next day. That's pretty much correct. It's 8 hours is the minimum in my experience. So if you're communion at 10, 2 in the morning, something like that. Today, I see great casualness in approaching communion, even slipping water moments before communion. What has changed? Okay. There is and has been at times blessings from spiritual fathers for some people to drink water, let's say 2 hours before or 3 hours before or whatever, because they live in the desert like down in Arizona and it's really hot and people are dehydrated. Okay, so people drink some water. I get that. These are exceptions to the rule, and if it's done in the midst of divine liturgy, I think that's not acceptable. People are going and they're drinking water left and right, and they got their water bottle. That's not acceptable. If you've got some reason, you got to take a pill when you get up in the morning, you drink some water, that's fine. Otherwise, no. Otherwise, that's a part of the struggle. That's a part of our desire, right? To struggle and unless there's a medical issue or you've got some weaknesses or you're dehydrating or you just generally really struggle without a glass of water in the morning, then try to struggle and not take the water. It's good for you spiritually. It's good. Do it. Father, you mentioned that remarriage isn't permitted. Would that apply if the first marriage ended due to a difference in faith between the couple? Okay, they weren't Orthodox. They weren't Orthodox. Yeah, so it depends what you mean by second and first marriage. There's only one marriage ceremony that is blessed by the church as a marriage ceremony, like per se, it's the ceremony, right? The second marriage for people who their marriages failed, they're divorced, and now they're in trouble because they really can't live alone. They want to live alone. They need it. They want to be together with somebody. And they want to struggle with them. The second marriage is allowed, but it's not like the first marriage. It's penitential. So, do you call that marriage? I guess you do, but it's not marriage, properly speaking, like the first marriage. So as far as what you're saying here, they had difference in faith. I don't know what that means. They were Orthodox and they had a difference of agreement or something. What happened? I don't know. You'd have to ask me. I need much more details there. What you're talking about. It's hard to answer. Father, I'm facing a major surgery where there is a small risk of needing blood products. I will do the surgery, but I'm not wanting to take the blood products. There are side effects and risks even before the added facts of the blood supply being contaminated by the vax. Is this unreasonable on my part, given the risk given the risk is there but small? I don't know your reasoning. You didn't explain the reasons why you don't want the blood products except for the one reason. I don't know. I don't know how to answer you. What are the other reasons? This is probably something you would talk to your doctor about. First and foremost, get all the info, and then to your spiritual father. I don't think it's unreasonable if you can avoid it. It's up to you. It's up to you. If you want to avoid the blood products and you can do it, then that's your call. I didn't see any like matters of faith or matters of spiritual principle in your question, so maybe I'm missing what you're trying to get at. So I apologize for that. But all right, we're done, folks. God bless you. It's a good 3 hours. Glad to be back. See you on Thursday, and then next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week. Wednesday with DPH on his podcast. That's what is it called? Church of the Eternal Logos. All right. God bless you. Good struggles. Christ is risen. We'll see you again soon, no doubt. How do I get there? Let me see. We got a problem here with my. There it is. Okay, now I can get there. God bless. See you soon.
Πατρός